The CoCo Crew Podcast is hosted by CyberEars. If you are serious about your podcast hosting needs, you should check out CyberEars. Whether you are a podcaster, a radio host, a musician, a narrator, an audiobook author, or simply a school, church, corporation, or anyone else with an audio recording that needs to be hosted or distributed, you should check out cyberears.com. Unlimited bandwidth, fast, reliable, and rugged servers with no hidden fees. CyberEars. Your audio, your terms.
It's a blast from the past.
Please listen carefully.
CoCo.
Welcome to the CoCo Crew Podcast. A delicious adventure into the world of retro computing news and information. Featuring the Tandy Color Computer.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
CoCo.
All right. Welcome to episode 26 of the CoCo Crew Podcast. I am John Linville, one of the amazing hosts of this amazing show. Today, of course, we're joined by our indomitable co-host, Neil Blanchard. How you doing, Neil?
Doing great. Hello, everyone.
And, of course, the multi-talented and amazing Mike Rowan. How you doing, Mike?
Hello, I'm doing good, enjoying the summer.
Good. For those who are fans of Mr. Pete, he's unfortunately not joining us this month. So in his place, we have another guest. This is going to be Jim Brain of Retro Innovations fame. How are you doing, Jim?
Doing fine, thank you very much.
And that's the right name, right? I didn't miss on that, right? Retro
No,
Innovations.
you did not. That's true.
Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Exciting times. Let's see. This is recording this in middle of July or starting to be late July. CoCo Fest is about 9 months away. Time to have your baby and bring it and deliver it in Chicago if you want to do that. Of course, Tandy Assembly. I should get the name right, huh? It's only, well, again, it depends on how you count it. It's really 3 or even just 2 months away. 2 months by the time you hear this, probably. Our exciting new gathering in Chillicothe, Ohio. I think, Jim, you're joining us for that, right?
I am indeed. Nope, I'm here. I'm got my tickets and I planning to be up there just as soon as it starts.
Awesome. That'll be great.
Yeah, that's great.
Cool. So what's everybody been working on? Anybody got a cool project in place or moving along? How's your you're going to construct an exhibit there, Mike? How's that coming along?
Well, I've been very busy and traveling a lot. I've got the components, but I haven't had a lot of time to spend with them. I've got some vacation toward the end of the month, so I'm hoping to do the majority of it then.
Well, good to have a plan. How about you, Neil?
I'm still working on those adapters. I'm waiting for parts for the Tandy 1000 EX and HX machines.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, to adapt the
well, that should be
what they call it, the Tandy plus port plus port to ISA.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see if we can get that working.
Yeah, it's just a pin for pin, so it should be okay. It's just a matter of getting the right IDC connector, that's all.
Oh, yeah. And, of course, pulling it off without driving yourself crazy or blind.
Yeah.
That's what. Yeah, I'm still kind of in the same holding pattern. Well, I haven't really done anything CoCo-y very much per se, but I am starting to clear the decks a little bit more, so I'm kind of getting more in a position where maybe I'll be able to do something cool in the next couple of months. I hate how sometimes I feel like I get buried and I just can't sit down to work on anything unless I go and work on something else first. You know what I mean?
That's kind of
How about you, Jim? You work on anything cool lately? How's that PI replacement coming?
So as you saw, people are asking. The summer happened. So I actually got, while I was in VCF Southeast, I met up with somebody and acquired a bunch of Tandy Model 2/12/16 machines. And so I was kind of hoping to put together an exhibit for that. But I know that Pete Satinsky, I think is his name, is going to be at Tandy Assembly. He's also going to have probably a Model 2 display. And so I don't know. They're pretty heavy machines and they're in kind of rough shape right now. And so I'm not sure if I'm going to get them ready in time. So I might just bring CoCo projects. But I've always enjoyed the Model 2 line as far as, having 8-inch floppy disks and running Xenix and whatnot. So if I can get one or two of them put together and get an exhibit put together of them, I might drag them. But they will take up the whole table if I bring one or two of them because they're huge.
Yeah, they are huge for sure. That was this year at CoCo Fest that you got in the bidding war to get a couple of those, right?
That's right. So that was the first two, and then they didn't have keyboards, and so I was going to Southeast right after the week after, and so I did a bunch of research that week and tried to figure out how to get some more parts so I have some full units. So
very cool.
Cool. Well, that transitions a little bit. So Jim's been picking up old Tandy parts. Anybody else got any cool acquisitions, eBay or otherwise?
I actually haven't picked up anything. Been dry this month.
Oh,
well, I've been out in Florida though, so I've been kind of wasting time.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah,
you weren't really dry. How about you, Mike?
I picked up a Tandy AC4 acoustic coupler. Which is it's cool. It's a modem. It'll do 110 baud or 300 baud. Kind of a neat thing to add to the collection. And this one was very nice condition, complete with a box. Even has the power supply box and the manual. It's in great shape. Cool.
I've got a couple of things, my endless parade of eBay purchases, I guess. But of interest, I did kind of virtually went across the pond and found an eBay seller that would ship from the UK to the United States. And they had some Dragon games listed, and they had a couple that were microdeal games that were both the Dragon version and the CoCo version on the same cassette.
Cool.
And so I got one, the Dark Pit, and I got another one. I got the Dark Pit already. I think I'm still waiting on Space Wreck. So we'll see how those turn out. But the big thing I got, this is another. I'm really going to have to give these up. Everyone, if you've listened to the show, I'm kind of a sucker for these program pack file, boxes or whatever. And found one that was, a nice intact program pack file. But the even cooler part, one cool thing about it was not only was it the program pack file, it also was stuffed full of program packs, which was cool, although I pretty much have all of those anyway. But the really cool part was it was actually in the original Radio Shack box with the artwork and everything. Even had one of the inserts inside with the instructions on how to use it. Of course, if you need instructions on how to use it, you probably shouldn't have it. But
well, I hope you bring that to Tandy.
So anyway,
I've never seen a box on one of those.
Well, I might should do that. It's kind of cool. All right. Well, I didn't mean to leave you out, Jim. We kind of started with you, but if you had any other acquisitions you wanted to brag about, we'll open the floor. Anything?
I went to Dayton, Dayton Hamvention, which is not in Dayton anymore, but that happened a little bit after CoCo Fest, and I picked up an actual teletype. So,
wow.
So it's one of the later models. I think it's called a 43. So it's electronic as opposed to all mechanical, but it's kind of cool to have an actual teletype.
Yeah, normal humans can actually move the 43s. Or the 33s are huge, and they should be. Oh shit!
That's true. Well, and I was there. It was actually free. It was sitting there, and it was in the flea market area, and I saw it, and it says free, and I thought, well, for that, I'll pick it up and drag it. And it was still heavy. I mean, they're a boat anchor, but the guy saw me interested in it, and he said, "Hey, you interested in this other teletype that I have?" And I thought, well, not really, but I want to humor the guy. So I walked over there, and he had like a 15 or something, which is the all metal, built like a tank unit. And he's like, you want this? And I'm like, you know what? I'll have to think about that.
Let me go check and see if I've got a big enough truck.
Right. That's right. But I got it home and plugged it in and cleaned it up and WD-40'd the ribbon, and it works.
Cool. Now, will that work with the Videotex cartridge? Or
I don't know. We could take. I was thinking when he was talking about his acoustic modem, I was thinking, well, we could. I have an old black and white rotary phone, the old style, with a big long cord, and we could put that on your acoustic uplink modem there, and 300 bauds as much as the teletype will do anyway. So we could maybe see if we could get something set up.
No, that's cool. Awesome. Well, cool. I think that's a good warm-up. We've had a nice little introduction. So we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with some announcements.
Over time, all CoCos suffer from performance loss and increased electricity consumption. That's because even the best-made CoCos create bit plaque during computation. These plaque deposits build up on integrated circuits, causing a variety of performance problems, including increased power consumption, random resets, excessive heat, and clock skips. CoCo Renew is specially formulated to remove up to 99% of bit plaque buildup.
My Color Computer 3 was really getting hard to use. It would keep resetting right in the middle of King's Quest. Do you know how frustrating it is to lose your place in a game? I was about ready to throw away my CoCo 3 and buy a new one. But then I discovered CoCo Renew.
Cosmic rays, beta particles, and the interaction of the moon and Earth's magnetic fields only make the problem of bit plaque accumulation worse.
I tried everything. I reseated chips, I replaced caps, I even replaced the transformer. Diagnostics all passed, but my CoCo was still randomly locking up. I was getting so frustrated, I couldn't even sleep. I started to drink heavily, all because I couldn't figure out what was wrong with my CoCo. My life was beginning to spin out of control. But then life changed when I discovered CoCo Renew.
CoCo Renew's patent-pending formula not only removes bit plaque, but also protects your computer from future plaque buildup.
Since using CoCo Renew, my system is rock-steady stable.
One application of CoCo Renew, and it's like a new machine.
Find your GPS coordinates and look them up on the easy-to-use Lunar Magnetic Calendar. This will tell you which day of the month to use CoCo Renew. Then simply disconnect the transformer and the keyboard from your CoCo's motherboard. Slide it into the included Perspex tray and gently pour CoCo Renew over the motherboard until it's entirely submersed. Place the cover over the tray and leave for 24 hours. Remove the motherboard using the included tongs and gloves. Rinse the motherboard gently with a garden hose and allow to dry for 24 hours. Now place the motherboard in the included striped Mylar envelope. Seal it and place it in a dark area for 3 days. Gently remove the motherboard from the envelope and scrub with denatured alcohol using the included brush. Gently rinse the motherboard with a garden hose and allow to dry for 24 hours. Now find the Julian date on the Lunar Magnetic Calendar to find the best time of day to reinstall the motherboard. Reconnect the keyboard and transformer. That's all there is to it. Now your CoCo will perform like new.
No more resets. No more lost games.
No lockups, it runs cooler, and I've started to attend AA meetings.
Don't throw away your color computer. Renew it with CoCo Renew.
Thanks, CoCo Renew.
And coming soon, CoCo Renew PAL, Dragon Renew, and MC10 Renew. Persons using this product assume responsibility for its use in accordance with current directions of the manufacturer. CoCo Renew makes no representations or warranties of any kind, either express or implied, regarding this information or the product to which this information refers. CoCo Renew contains leprechaun plasma derivatives and polyisobutylene. Women who are pregnant or may become pregnant should not be exposed to CoCo Renew. Do not drink or ingest CoCo Renew. Read all warnings and product information before using CoCo Renew. Drinking problem? Visit www.aa.org.
Okay, now we're back with some announcements. Of course, we're the CoCo Crew Podcast, and we are available on Twitter as @CoCo Crew Podcast. That's all one word. So feel free to tweet to us. We may tweet back to you, whatever kids are doing on Twitter these days. So It's a good way to send us links and that sort of thing if you want. Anyway, another good way to reach out to us, we're on Facebook as the CoCo Crew Podcast. We have a Facebook group, I should say. There's spaces in that one, the CoCo Crew Podcast. Again, send us some links, give us some news of what you've been doing, or just ask us for the latest news on Tandy Assembly or whatever else comes to mind. The podcast, of course, is available on iTunes through Google Play. And, of course, we're available for streaming on Stitcher and TuneIn. So if any of those float your boat, feel free to check in to those services. And, of course, you've already found us if you're hearing us now, but, feel free to pass it along to any of your friends. The CoCo Crew Podcast is a member of the Throwback Network. The Throwback Network, of course, is a collection of retro-themed podcasts, many of which are technology or gaming-oriented, some of which are more 80s-themed, 80s culture, stuff like the Greatest American Hero podcast, or so I think there's one about holiday specials. A lot of cool things there. If you're looking for another podcast, and if you're of a retro mindset, then you may want to check out the Throwback Network. We are also listed on the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. This, again, is another collection of podcasts. These are all technology or gaming oriented. But if that's a little more your speed, then you may want to check those out and find something else to listen to while you wait for the next episode of the CoCo Crew. Audio for the CoCo Crew podcast is, of course, hosted by Cyber Ears. If you have a need to host audio content on the internet, you should definitely check out Cyber Ears, where you will get your audio on your terms. Of course, if you want to reach out to the CoCo Crew Podcast via that old technology known as email, we have some addresses set up for you, whatever sticks in your memory the best. If you want to reach the three hosts, myself, Mike, and Neil, then you can reach us at show, SHOW, at cococrew.org, or you can reach us at podcast, PODCAST, at cococrew.org. Or you can reach us as feedback, FEEDBACK, at cococrew.org. If you have reason to communicate with one of us individually, then we have addresses set up for that as well. You can reach me as John, JOHN, at cococrew.org. You can reach Neil as NEIL at cococrew.org. Or you can reach Mike, MIKE, at cococrew.org. Those are pretty much our standard announcements, but we also like to cover some events of interest for retro-minded folks. By the time you hear this podcast, it's too late, but Kansas Fest is happening starting July 18th, running through the 23rd. That is a gathering of Apple II enthusiasts that happens at Rockhurst University. Where the Apple II geeks get together, spend time together in a dorm for a week, talk about retro topics, and otherwise engage in various tomfoolery. Of course, if you didn't already know about that, you couldn't get in anyway because it's already filled up. They have 100. They hit their 100 attendee cap, which I think someone said that was the first time they'd hit that many attendees since 1994. So that's pretty good. Hopefully, we get numbers like that for CoCo Fest and or Tandy Assembly or both. So beat the retro drum. Get your friends to come along. Another event that you may have already missed by the time you hear this podcast is the Commodore Vegas Expo version 13.0. That was July 29th through 30th of 2017. This is a Commodore event. It's held in Las Vegas. If you like gambling, if you like Commodore, sounds like a good combination. Hard to go wrong, right? Anyway, so that's Commodore Vegas Expo version 13.0, July 29th through 30th. Moving on, two events in the same, overlapping in different ends of the country. CoCo Expo, that's the Sophie Reynolds event, happening in New Jersey. It's all things CoCo, whether you like Cabbage Patch Kids or the ColecoVision or whatever else. August 5th and 6th in New Jersey. The link is in the show notes. Also August 5th and 6th in California, the VCF West 12 being held at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. This is a VCF event. If you make it to this event, you will no doubt be exposed to a variety of old computers in various forms. No doubt a worthwhile event, particularly for the historically minded. If you have a way to get to this event or just to the venue even, I highly recommend it. Let's see. Moving on from there, coming up in September 9th and 10th of 2017, we have VCF Midwest 12. That'll be back in the Chicago area. I imagine, I'm not going to speak for Jim, but I'll bet it's a good chance to meet Jim Brain in person.
Indeed.
And that's going to be held at Elk Grove Village, Illinois. It might be a good chance to meet several of the people on the show this time. I don't know if I'll make it, or I don't know who else might make it, but, go see it. It's a good chance to see some old computers, and it's a good group of people that sponsor it. And, it's a fun event. Also highly recommended. Let's see, where am I at? Oh, yes. Well, the next event after that, October 7th and 8th, 2017, is Tandy Assembly. This is a new event sponsored by some really cool podcast dudes, including your host here and the host of Trash Talk. And Randy Kindred thrown in there as the host of Floppy Days, although he's also one of the hosts of Trash Talk. And this will be your Tandy event. This is an event open for all Tandy computers, Z80 based, 6809 based, the MC10, and the Tandy 1000, Pocket PCs, whatever else you got. I guess they're pocket computers, not pocket PCs. Anyway, this is going to be held in Chillicothe, Ohio, a quaint little town in southeastern Ohio. I think it's going to be a fun event. This is our inaugural event, and we're looking forward to it. Did you have something to say, Mike?
I was saying you're going to love it, Chillicothe.
You're going to love it. You're going to love it. That's right.
Good place.
Cool place. I think it's a nice venue. It's going to be a weekend of Tandy. How bad could it be, right?
Exactly.
All right. Well, so moving on. This is Neil's event, World of Commodore. Still got it as World of Commodore 16. I'm not sure. I guess the World of Commodore, well, it's not even 2016, though, is it? World of Commodore. It's World of Commodore. Ignore the 16 if I don't manage to get it out of the show notes. This will be held in the Toronto area. And it'll be what do you say, Neil? The first weekend of December.
First Saturday of every December.
It's done on Saturday and Sunday. I think they do it both days, don't they?
Both days, yeah. And that's also a place where you can meet Jim Brain as well.
Jim gets around.
I'm hoping to get to it this year myself.
Definitely. It looks like that should be the 2nd and 3rd, 2017. Okay, well, I correct the schedule here. So it's World of Commodore 2017, maybe. 2nd and 3rd. All right, well, this is a cool event. I know Neil always talks about it and enjoys it there in Toronto. And Jim, I assume that you would also speak highly of this event?
So, yes.
Yeah. I hear it's a great bunch of guys, even if they are kind of Canadian.
Canadian flavor.
We make fun of them when us U.S. folks make fun of them when we get up there, so it's all fun. It's all awesome.
That's right. I think they enjoy it. All right. So next is a new event that just seen the announcements for. I know when we were up for VCF East, Evan Koblenz had just made the deal for this, I think, and he was beside himself, about to explode, wanting to announce things, but he couldn't at that time. Strongly hinted that this was a possibility, but here we now finally have the official announcement for the Vintage Computing Festival Pacific Northwest, and that's going to be held at the Living Computer Museum in Seattle, Washington, February 10th through 11th of 2018. So if you are up in that Seattle, Portland, whatever kind of area, and you're jonesing for some retro computing stuff, VCF is coming. They're bringing help. Help is on the way. So that looks like it'll be a good event, no doubt. Obviously, the venue has a good reputation. Obviously, VCF has a good reputation. I expect that it'll be a great event. So, be there or be square. Cool. So, and of course, the big event that prompted the creation of this podcast, the latest iteration, the 27th annual Last Chicago CoCo Fest, coming up April 21st and 22nd of 2018. That'll be held in Lombard, Illinois, at the Heron Point Convention Center. You can come and touch the heron. I feel like we've said plenty about CoCo Fest, and yet people always say, "Oh, you don't promote it enough." So definitely a cool event. Definitely a cool event, and definitely one I've been going to for a number of years. It's a great place to go, hang out with people, meet some good friends, and enjoy your CoCo displays, talk about things. And, if that's not enough, you can you have good access. You can enjoy a little time in the Windy City as well. So, very good. Well, that brings us to the end of our event announcements. And so I think we're going to take another little break, hear from our sponsors, and then we'll be back with some news.
Tandy Assembly offers attendees a unique opportunity to meet and interact with other fans of Radio Shack and Tandy computers from the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Something new is here.
Speakers include TRS-80 creator Don French, author of Star Trek III and Dog Star Adventure Lance Miklas, and game designer Scott Adams of Adventure International. Vendors include Bartlett Labs, Cloud9, Neil's Computer Service, Retro Innovations, Retro Tinker, and Strongware. Meet podcasters from Floppy Days, the CoCo Crew Podcast, TRS-80 Trash Talk, and YouTube sensation The Original Gamer Stevie Stroh. Join us for 2 days of retro computing fun in Chillicothe, Ohio, October 7th and 8th. For more information, visit our website at www.tandyassembly.com.
Myro. It'll catch on.
New from Bumblebee Software, it's ColorSpeak, the easy-to-use color computer voice synthesizer.
Greetings, everybody. I am a speech synthesizer.
The ColorSpeak voice synthesis cartridge works with all color computers, 4K through 64K, and all versions of BASIC. That's because ColorSpeak has its own internal 2K of RAM, and all of the software required is stored on its own onboard ROM. Just plug it into your color computer, power up, and begin using ColorSpeak. ColorSpeak features text-to-speech mode,
text-to-speech,
phoneme mode, inflection mode, and spelling mode. From BASIC, simply assign a string of text to the talk $ variable and call the USR routine to speak it.
How are you?
ColorSpeak includes user manual, phoneme dictionary, cartridge pack, and demo tape. Just $169 from Bumblebee Software.
All right, welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. Now it's time for some news. Our first news item today comes from Facebook from Mateo Trevisan. I hope I'm pronouncing that somewhat correctly. Anyway, Mateo has made a clock. It's a CoCo time clock made by me, completely set upable. So Mateo's Italian, so forgive him if his English isn't perfect, but he's got a clock, a little clock program that he's written for the CoCo. Well, it appears to be running in VCC there. And he's got a link. What's at the link? It's taking too long. Anyway, Mateo's sharing his programming adventure here with the CoCo with us. So very cool. Thank you, Mateo. Thanks for sharing. Moving on. Two similar links. The first one, become proficient in Forth with free books. This is from LX or Linux News. This is a Linux-oriented site, but they, the overlap with people who are interested in programming should be obvious. They've done a series of these where they will pick a programming language or other computer science topic, and they'll find books that have been made available that you can download, like as PDFs or whatever else. And so here they've got a collection of books on Forth. And so if you want to learn more about the Forth computing language, which of course has many implementations for various retro computers, including the CoCo, then here's some educational resources that might benefit you.
I think that's a good one for Jim O'Keefe.
For Forth, yeah. Well, he probably already knows that stuff.
Yeah, true. He's probably beyond that.
Yeah, and you don't have to know third as a prerequisite.
Yeah, no third. But you might want to, by the time you're done, you might need a fifth. Something. All right, moving on. The same basic site also has another link, and this one is for Logo. To learn logo programming. And they have a collection of Logo books. And of course, many of us are probably familiar with the Logo programming language. My case is actually the first programming language I was actually exposed to on the Apple II. But of course, there's Logo implementations for the CoCo, of course. And it can just be cool to expand the mind by learning a new programming language either way. Any of you guys programming Logo? Not today.
Not.
Well, anyway, if you decide you want to program in Logo, here's where you can teach yourself. All right. Moving on. So here's a tweet from the Trash Talk guys. It says, old school computer networking using wing nuts. So what? No fancy BNC connectors here. And so what he's got is a TRS-80 Model 4 with a couple of screw terminals in the back. And these turn out to be for a kind of networking called OmniNet, which was the actual technology behind the TRS-80 Network 4. So why do I include it here? Well, it's kind of interesting. This is sort of a follow-on to the the network controllers that you could get that were basically just plugged into the cassette ports and let you load cassettes between machines. But this is actual LAN technology. But why is it interesting to me? Well, so if you look at the connectors, Brother Jeremy for years had brought some artifacts to CoCo Fest, one of which was what he called it an Ethernet card, but as someone who's familiar with Ethernet, it was clearly not an Ethernet card because it had these two weird connectors with these wing nuts on them. It's like, what in the world is that, right? But, I looked at it and I assumed it was some sort of networking card, just not actually Ethernet, and so whatever, kind of let it go. But looking at this, I'm pretty well convinced that artifact that Brother Jeremy has displayed is in fact the CoCo interface, or a prototype interface for the CoCo for this Tandy Network 4 that just must have never been released or whatever. But yeah, so it's
Are you sure it's not the
anyway.
ArcNet card? because I know they did ArcNet, but I don't know if they released it or not.
Well, I'm not 100% sure, and I'm not even sure how different OmniNet is from ArcNet. I had previously thought it was ArcNet too, but looking at these connectors, it definitely is the same connector. And so, anyway, it can be like the 256 color mode if you like. We can all have our own theories.
Enough.
But anyway, if nothing else, if you follow the tweet, it's got a link to a TRS-80 Network 4 write-up at TRS-80.org. You can read about it, draw your own conclusions. And like I say, it could be either way, but this one seems, seems like a likely candidate to me for what Brother Jeremy has. So anyway, that's that. All right, moving on. Here's a Hackaday link. Writer is Brian Benchoff. He writes a lot of retro stuff at Hackaday. It says BBSing with the ESP8266. And so what it is, he's got one of those devices that we mentioned last month that Mike and I had obtained and that Neil had tried to obtain and so far had not been successful. Did you ever get one of these, Neil?
No, I missed the second run. I'm on the list for the third.
Yeah, cool. So anyway, I mean, it's basically, it's a serial port connected to, a wireless networking port that lets you do telnet using a Hayes AT style command set. Instead of dialing the phone, you're doing telnet or whatever. It's both interesting and cool and sort of ghetto at the same time. But
that's why I like it.
It can open up the world of internet-connected BBSs to your actual retro computers. So from that perspective, pretty useful. So anyway, since we'd mentioned it last month, I thought I should include the link this month. All right, let's see. Moving on. Final update to mini list for the Tandy Color computer from Jamie Cho. I think we mentioned Jamie Cho's mini list last time as well. But here he's done another update, added some features, whatever. So if last time's mention of mini list wasn't enough to get you programming in Lisp on the CoCo, maybe this will be the final nudge you need. It's a shame we didn't have a free book collection on Lisp, huh? I think they've done one, but I didn't have the link. So what do you think, Neil? You're breaking into some Lisp programming on the CoCo?
Actually, funny you mentioned that. I ran into an old colleague of mine, and I don't know how Lisp came up on discussion, but basically he said, you don't want to get involved in that. You might as well go right to assembly. So I don't know. It sounds a little much, right?
Well, I know some, Lisp is one of those things in computer science that people either love it or they hate it, I think. And the people who love it are the people who use Emacs to program. Not coincidentally, Emacs macros are written in Lisp. And I don't know. It's a different mindset for sure. The language itself looks a little funny with, lots of insanely silly parentheses. But it is a retro language. It's definitely a legitimate programming language even today. And it's learning different kinds of programming styles can expand your mind, so to speak. So if you don't want to risk, the devil's weed or whatever, then you could try programming in Lisp and see if that messes you up any worse. All right. Well, moving on to a completely different kind of topic. Let's see. This is a link to Atlas Obscura. I don't know a lot about that site, but it says these maps reveal the hidden structures of choose-your-own-adventure books. Now, I don't know. The ages are different enough here. I'm not sure if anyone else really was into choose-your-own-adventure books because they seem to have come out and had maybe a 8 or 10 year lifespan, and then people didn't seem to mess with them as much anymore. Did you guys do choose-your-own-adventure books when you were kids?
I did.
Yeah. So I remember they were very popular when I was a kid, and at the time I just assumed they'd always existed. But looking back, they came out about the time I was entering third grade or something, and then they only published them for like 6 or 8 years or something. So it really wasn't that big a time frame. But anyway, they're cool little books for young adult readers, or not even young adult, maybe just kid readers. And you'd read a little while and say, well, do you run? You're being chased by a bear. Do you run into the woods, or do you drop and play dead, or whatever? And then, depending on which choice you made, you'd turn to another page and continue on from there. So, if you're like me and still have some sort of weird fascination with these books, then maybe you could check out some of the maps of this site. Otherwise, well, maybe you don't care. But
I saw the maps, and it was really cool. I had to dig out some of my Choose Your Adventure books to see, because we used to you'd read it through a couple times and get annoyed at the different endings that you ended up with, and eventually you just read the book from front to back to find out all the different options. But I never thought of writing a map.
That's right. That's pretty much what we would do too. And yeah, very cool. All right. Well, so moving on, we have a blog entry from Glenn Hewlett. Of course, Glenn is he's been doing our transcode projects where he takes binary code for arcade games, most recently Pac-Man, and written for the Z80, and then translating them to be a binary code for the 6809. Anyway, he's given us a blog entry on programming in assembly language using a modern computer. And so he talks about using the LW tools for cross assembly, and using MAME for testing code and that sort of stuff. So if you've been wanting to get your feet wet doing some assembly language coding for the CoCo, but you just can't bear the thought of dragging out the old CoCo and hunching down in front of your TV and typing on that little keyboard or whatever, but you're not quite sure how to proceed, well, this should be a pretty good overview. Hoping to have Glenn on the show maybe in the next couple of months. We'll see how that works out. But anyway, it's a cool blog post. You should check it out. Okay, so up next is our Jim Gary section. And so, as anyone who listens to the show knows, Jim Gary is a prolific author of CoCo, or really MC10 programs written in BASIC, or primarily in BASIC. And sometimes he then further translates them or tweaks them or whatever it takes to get them running on a CoCo. Or occasionally he just targets a CoCo, whatever. But, almost every month, Jim drops us off a collection of new programs to run that you can check out. Usually they're games, almost always games. And so this month he's got 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so he's got one called Mount Fuji. He's got an update on one called Snowboarder. He's got one called Dominoes. He's got one called Flippool or Flypool. I'm not sure how that's supposed to be pronounced. And then he's got one called Flippool. Wizard's Castle, which looks like kind of a Flippool. So he's got Wizard's Castle, which looks like it's some sort of adventure game. So anyway, I would click on them, but they bring up YouTube, and he always has music underlays on his videos, so messes with our audio.
He picks good music to put behind those. And the Mount Fuji game is pretty cool, as was the snowboarding game. So you watch these and you want to go out and get an MC10 again.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's cool stuff. That's what I keep saying. I like some of these projects where, they're not necessarily amazing. Oh my God, how did you ever do that kind of stuff? They're more like, well, he just kind of took some of his free time and sat down and did a little project to enjoy himself and shared it with us. And I think that's really cool. So anyway, well, so once again, good work, Jim. Keep fighting the good fight, huh? Your friends are talking, you don't know what they mean. It's all about computers, it's a whole new scene. You wanna be a whiz kid, not just another teen. It's basic. Don't you know what I mean? Learn basic, just basic. Otherwise you'll have to fake it. Program that computer till you get it right. It doesn't matter, could be day or night. It's basic, just basic. It's basic, just basic. Woo! Myro. It'll catch on. All right, well, moving on. So here's one. The tweet is from someone named Chartreuse K, which is clearly a pseudonym, but I wasn't able to track down a real name for him. But he is a graduate student working underneath John Aycock, who a few months back, in lieu of a tech segment, I did a book review on a book. It's called Digital Archaeology, I believe it was called. And that was written by John Aycock. Well, this is one of his graduate students. And so they built a card then that it plugs into an Atari 2600, and then it's powered by a Teensy 3.6, which is a microcontroller device. I think is that based around Arduino or an AVR? I think it is.
Yeah, it's at Mel.
The Teensy line is, but I believe the 3.x line is ARM chips. So they may be the Atmel ARM chips, but I think they're ARM chips. They're fast chips.
Well, either way, a pretty powerful chip then. So this person has gone and added, taken that microcontroller and added some extra circuitry to interface it to an Atari 2600. God knows what he's feeding the Atari 2600, but one way or another, he can do full motion video on the Atari 2600 output there. It's a little bit of a cheat. Obviously, he's adding a bunch of hardware to it, but I thought it was kind of cool, just in a general hack kind of sense. And then it's also funny because it's the same video that Ed Snyder had been using to demo his player with the CoCo SDC and the CoCo 2. So anyway, well, it just amuses me. Sorry. What do you think of this project, guys?
I actually was really interested in it and thought about maybe trying to emulate it on the CoCo line. But my question is whether people would look at it and say, "Oh, this system is just a cheat," or whether they'd see it as something that's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, you probably get all variations of opinions. I even kind of did both opinions myself right here. So, I'm sure there'd be all kinds of variations there. What do you think, Neil?
I think it's cool. I mean, anything to do with video work. I mean, definitely impressive, especially on Atari 2600 console.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, I don't know who this person is. It says he's a graduate student, so it's probably some 20-something trying to impress his professor who's obsessed with the retro computers. So I think he picked up a good project in that respect. Anyway, pretty cool little project. Okay, so moving on, we got a post from Simon Jonason where he is using the emulated version of my cartridge with this SN7649 chip on it, and he's implementing a player there so that you can play music not just from register dumps, but actually based on like a musical score or whatever. I thought it sounded pretty cool, and it's not the most over the top amazing music demo ever, but I thought it'd be the kind of thing that would be great to have playing in the background of a game, which is pretty much what I intended to begin with. So I don't know, what do you guys think, Mike?
Yeah, sounds great. It's cool he's taking a different approach rather than just doing the register dumps too. So yeah, neat.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this project you have here, John. That chip, that's the same as the Sega Master System sound chip, is it not?
Sega Master, yes.
Yeah. See, when you hear the game music in those Sega games, it's just amazing. And I'm just thinking, like if we can get that on the CoCo, I mean, that would be great.
Yeah, but this one isn't this one though? This is his Orchestra 90cc compatible. He has another one that has the other chip, right?
No. This that link was for the one using my game cartridge.
Okay.
Emulated in me.
Okay.
But yeah, he does. I mean, he does have a couple of different projects that are similar.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, they're similar hardware in some respects, quite different in others. But anyway, well, cool. Well, it's good to see somebody take some interest there. Maybe we'll get some of those out in the market at some point. All right, moving on. We've got a link from a post by Mark Malte. It looks like a French fellow of some sort. I don't know if he's a Quebecois or an actual Frenchman. Who knows? But he says he's made a blog for French CoCo users. Le coin du TRS couleur paradis du CoCo 3, as I butcher the beautiful French language.
That actually doesn't sound bad.
Anyway, it's a shame Boise's not here. He could read it to us.
Oh.
But so it's a blog and TRS Color COULEUR .blogspot.com, and so apparently he's blogging about the CoCo in French, en français. So pretty cool. Good to expand our world a little bit, huh? Let's see. Okay, moving on to the next link. It's a post from Ed Snyder saying that he's now shipping the small run of Orchestra 90cc compatible CoCo DAC 16 cartridges that he produced. Did he already sell out of these?
I think they're gone.
I'm not sure. Yeah, one says one left, and then probably gone by now. Anyway, problem with a monthly show sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, you might if you don't have an Orc 90 and let's see. Well, the CoCo Flash has Orc 90 hardware in it, does it not, Jim?
It does. So they'll do the same thing.
Well, there you go. So you have if you need an Orchestra 90 output and you didn't make it with Ed's offering, or if you prefer one that has some flash functionality as well, then contact Mr. Brain, and I'm sure he'll be able to hook you up.
Yep. How much did Ed's? I mean, I can't see the price. How much did Ed's go for? Because probably a cheap one. Huh? Oh, 50. Okay.
They were $50 each. Yeah.
Okay.
So, the big plus there, he did use our cartridge cases, so that was nice. But
nice looking.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. Well, so if you didn't get to one, sorry you missed it, but there are some other opportunities. Okay, moving on. And Boise Pete, here's a blast from the past. Loaded up like on a CoCo 3 like this, run CoCo demo. Did he talk about this some on the last episode when he was with us?
I don't recall if he did or not.
He's got it in the link here. It says, story behind this. In 1988, he wanted to write a demo program for the local Radio Shack stores so they could run it on their CoCo 3s. Fresh out of high school, starting my first semester of college. A friend of mine, James Allen, ponied up the money for the disc labels, which we had printed at a professional printing shop. We went to Radio Shack stores around the area and gave floppy disks away with the hope that corporate would notice. We even sent them a copy. Of course, it got nowhere. All those years I've been carrying the original floppy as well as a digitized copy. While cleaning up some drives, I found it and wanted to share it with the community. So I didn't actually get a chance to run this. You guys run Boise's demo?
Yeah. It's got some graphics in it and kind of a volcano erupting. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's out on Color Computer Archive. So yeah, give it a try.
So especially if you're looking for you want to run a CoCo 3 exhibit somewhere at a local maker fair or whatever kind of things you might have that you'd put a CoCo on display, maybe you want to check out this demo and see if it suits your taste. Very cool. All right. So moving on, this link comes from Gamma Sutra. It's a gaming-oriented site, but this is an interesting thing. Dev rescues 80s text adventure source code by baking tapes in an oven. So apparently this is a source code for a number of early text adventures from Magnetic Scrolls. Not sure which games that involves. But apparently they had these backup tapes. Apparently they had these backup tapes. Yeah, the Pawn. I see that. And I don't know how they were stored or whatever, but I guess they degrade in a way that makes the plastic of the tape soften up or something. But if you heat it, they'll regel somewhere. I don't know. It sounds a little crazy, but I guess they've managed to perfect that chemistry experiment or whatever it is.
That's pretty cool. It sounds like it was DLT tapes. I used to work with a lot of those on deck hardware.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
TK50 tape cartridges.
Yeah. The problem is, that the tapes are just a piece of mylar or whatever, and they've got the iron oxide glued to it, and the glue gets sticky. So that's what baking does. It cements the glue long enough so you can read the tapes.
Ah.
But it's, you can only, it's not that uncommon. So, it's cool they've done it. It's not like it's the first person to ever do this sort of thing, but man, you're right at the edge of, this is like last ditch stuff, right? If the baking doesn't work, then that's it. Baking's kind of the end of the line, one of the end of the line items that you can do.
So basically what you're saying is if you can read the data after the baking, quickly get it and copy it onto something else.
Oh yeah. When you, you don't have much time at all, right? Because the glue's just turned, it's gotten all that's the whole thing. The glue's lost it's starting to lose its cohesion, and even while you're baking them, it's leaving part of the iron oxide on the other side of the tape that sits right on top of the as you wind it up on the reel. So you're already running just barely good enough to get a reading. So typically when they read them, they try to read them raw format, so they just read the like putting it in a tape deck and read it and then digitize it all and then sort it out later.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty intense.
Cool that they got them, though.
Yeah, definitely cool. So, all right. Well, moving on to the next link. So this one I included because we sort of kind of danced around the edges of this one with some of our discussions in the past, but the topic is a Hackaday link from Bob Badley. I'm not familiar with Bob there, but topic is, will it sell? And so it says, many of us develop things for one of two purposes: to hack something cool or to sell something cool. When you're hacking something cool, your target market is yourself. But if you want to sell the thing you're making, you got to put in some more thought and effort. So anyway, it talks about, if you're building something that you want to sell, the kind of things you need to think about: who's the target market, how much will it cost, will the target market buy it, how are you going to sell it, that sort of thing. Like I said, we've kind of danced around it with a few of our discussions here. Maybe with Jim here is maybe a little more of an expert than we are on producing stuff for retro computing markets. Mm-hmm. I know you target, as well as the CoCo, I know you target the Commodore market. I don't know if there's any differences there, but certainly some of the same things are going to overlap as far as you have to figure out if people actually want what you want to produce, and how to produce what people want, if they can take.
That's the thing. It's. A lot of people feel like, hey, there's a few of us and we have this really cool idea and let's build it. And I'm like, that's great, except there's a minimum number you have to make in order to unless you want to sit at home and do the stuff by hand, which I'm glad if somebody has time to do that, but I don't. So you have to find a happy medium between what people are willing to, what you're willing to design and support and what people are willing to buy. I'll be honest with you. It's a great article. I think I really had to resist the urge to say a collective, well, duh, as I read the thing, because I live this all the time. So it was tough for me to glean anything new who come into this thinking, well, I have a great idea. Why don't you just make it? I'm like, because you're the only one that cares. And I'm going to sell a grand total of one of them.
Right. No, definitely people. I think a lot of people that don't face that, especially, you get a lot of people have an idea for something, and they'll tell you, I have no idea how to build this, but I think you'd sell a bunch of them. Or
I had a guy show up at one of the shows one time. He sat down in a chair next to me, like a CoCo Fest type show, and he said, "Oh man, I got ideas. I know 99% of this is just coming up with the ideas." And I just wanted to throttle him. I'm like, dude, I got ideas to last me for 20 years, right? It has nothing to do with ideas. It's all about the work necessary to turn them into something real. And people just don't understand that. They just think the idea is the big item. And if they can just dream it up, then, it's just a couple nights, Jim, and you can have it whipped up. Well, yeah, that'd be nice if it was that true, but that's not true.
Right. And they always want it for $5.
Well, and that's the thing. I told people, I said, I don't want to get too much on the soapbox, but, you go to shows, and especially for classic machines like this, $20, $30, $40, $50, man, people will drop $50 and they don't even worry about it. They'll lay $50 on the table and they'll go to lunch and they'll assume that you're going to take the money and give them something when they're back, or they'll give you $50 even though you've told them, listen, before I've developed this, and that's okay. Just keep my money, and when it gets ready, send me one. But you get up past $100, right? And then all of a sudden they're like, what's the significant other going to say if I drop $100 on this one little itty bitty item? I'm not too sure about that. So you have to find the sweet spot, and you get up past $100, $150, $200. That's the thing I don't understand. People have these projects and they're like $250 or $300, and people are like, yeah, I'm gonna build 100 or 1,000 or whatever these, and I'm thinking, wow, that's some serious dollars to drop on something that's basically a vintage type of environment. But hey, I guess if people have got the money, that's great. It just takes longer to move them.
That's true. Definitely true. Well, thank you for that insight. Let's see, where are we at? Let's go on from here. Start over there. So my next link is not CoCo at all. It's actually a programming course for the Commodore 64. But I included here just as an exposure to the kind of just the idea of what it is. So this guy, let's see, what is his name? Is it on here? Yeah, Michael Tashiki. I have no idea. Taszzycki. Anyway, Michael is offering programming courses for the Commodore 64, and he's got a collection of episodes, basically like YouTube videos, I guess. They cover a variety of programming topics, and so you can pay for them. You can pay, I guess, one episode is $3.99, or you can have a subscription as they come out. You can pay $10.99 a month, and you can watch these episodes that'll teach you how to program the Commodore 64, and they cover a whole lot of topics: basic 6502 assembly, cycle counting, handling sprites, displaying stuff in the border on the Commodore 64, sound, whatever. I have no idea if this guy's making any money, but do you think somebody would, do you think he could make any money doing these kind of?
I think it's pretty cool. The Commodore population is large enough that they'll probably do just fine.
That's amazing. So that's pretty cool. I don't know how many people could pull that off, or how many the community could support. but maybe this is something Steve Strobridge should try to figure out how to. So anyway, I hate to lose any of you guys to the Commodore community, but so anyway, check it out. Let me know what you think. I'd like to hear some feedback on that concept. All right, moving on to the next link. Is actually from Kevin Savitz, who is, if you listen to a lot of podcasts, terrible nerd, a lot of interviews of retro personalities. Anyway, this time Kevin's done a little project where he's taken the bongos controller from the Donkey Kong Country or something like that. I forget exactly which game he used those bongos.
That's on the GameCube.
He's interfaced them. Yes, that's right. And he's interfaced them to his Atari 8-bit and written a program where you can play with the Atari 8-bit using the bongos. And so, I know Kevin's not the most technical guy out there. So if he's managed to make this kind of project for his Atari, then it's within the reach of a lot of people that are listening to this podcast. So I want a way to play with the bongos on my CoCo. So somebody do it for me, damn it. So anyway, just an idea is using a controller that he had laying around and interfacing it to his computer and doing something cool with it. I think a lot of us have some situations like that we might could repurpose something into something fun for our retro computers. So there, that's why I shared it with you. All right, moving on. This one's from Glenn Hewlett announcing his Pac-Man version 1.01 update already. And of course, that was 2 weeks ago. So I don't know if there's been any more updates since then. I haven't seen any. Anyway, apparently had a little glitch with the gimme chip that caused some flickering or whatever. It's maybe the normal sparklies kind of problem that people complained about with the gimme for years. Apparently Nick showed him something about how to get around it. So there you go. If you're playing the transcoded Pac-Man, if you don't already have the version 1.01, you may want to go out and pick that up. Apparently it's already at CoCo Archive. So
it's
check it out.
What's funny is I actually like the version with the sparkles, the 1986 gimme. I think it's kind of cool.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
It is a cool game.
Lord.
I like the way that it scrolls up and down. That's kind of neat.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, it's well done.
Cool. All right, well, moving on. A post from Kieran Anscombe. He was working on that game that was a port from the BBC Micro called Dungeons, DUNJUNZ, the 4-person screen, dungeon crawler or whatever. Looked pretty cool. Anyway, posted a link where he's made the source code available on GitHub. So if you are an aspiring CoCo programmer with a GitHub account, actually you don't even need the account, I think. If you know how to use Git, then you can get your source code and check out what Kieran's been up to. Pretty cool. All right, moving on to another Dragon user, Phil Harvey Smith. He just shared a album on Facebook and didn't really say much about it, but the title of the album is Dragon Alpha Convert. And then he's got the pictures where he's got a board that he's installed into his Dragon. And I know that the Dragon Alpha was like a prototype version of the Dragon. I'm not sure it ever either never got released or at least didn't get much wide release. So I'm surmising that Phil, since he's a hardware kind of guy, he's got a project underway where you can convert your Dragon to a Dragon Alpha. So looks pretty cool. I doubt any of us are really serious Dragon users on here, so no, I'm sure none of us have tried it. But still, looks pretty cool. Okay, moving on. All right, here's one I thought was neat. I sent it to Neil. From NAND to Tetris, building a modern computer from first principles. So this is basically a couple of college professors. Not sure where they're from. Published in the MIT Press. I think the professors were from a university in Israel. But anyway, they have a kind of a different perspective on how to teach digital computing or whatever. And it sort of goes from starting from NAND gates and working up how you can build logic circuits based on NAND gates and blah, 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 and eventually turns into how to program with it and whatever. I just watched some of the short videos, introductions, sounded kind of cool. I don't know if it's practical or not, but it seemed like a neat idea. So thought I'd share in case anybody wants to check out the ideas and build their education on computers. Did you check that out, Neil?
Yeah, I did. I checked it out. It's a really cool way to learn. Get your interest in a different way. That could inspire certain types.
Sure. All right. Moving on. So here's one. This is not really new, but I don't know. Maybe so kind of obviously some people in the community weren't aware of it. As Brandon Robinson posted the Color Computer Facebook group, is pointing out in the Color Basic Unraveled 2 book, notes that the Color Basic ROM has some garbage bytes near the end of its memory area right after the coefficients for the Taylor series expansion of Sin or Sign. And so basically what it comes down to is these garbage bytes were really just left over. And they were actually copied kind of verbatim when Microsoft converted their basic source from the 6502 over to the 6809. And what they weren't actually garbage bytes. They were actually there to implement an Easter egg that was originally put in place ostensibly by Bill Gates to trap Jack Tramiel and keep him from trying to steal the Commodore Basic. If you check out the link, there's another link to where it's better documented at pagetable.com. Anyway, it's a cool story that it exists at all, and then even cooler to think that this. It gives you a little insight into how computer business worked, or maybe still works sometimes when you're doing programs for hire or whatever, and that sometimes it's easier just to copy over a chunk of code, including a chunk of data, even if you don't really know what all the data is for. Sometimes you just leave it there because you don't know. If you don't know what it's for, then you don't know you can take it out.
Yeah, it's a cool article. It's the Easter eggiest.
Yeah, pretty cool. Of course, it turns out the CoCo 6809 Color Basic has some more Easter eggs on top. And then I think when Microware did the Super Extended Color Basic, they added to those Easter eggs with their own extensions. Maybe we should do a spot on that at some point. But I remember seeing some of those when we were looking up trivia questions for CoCo Fest. Anyway, moving on. So here's a link from someone named Lee Perkins, shared to the group 6502 Programming. It seems like we're really going off into the weeds here. But so apparently Lee has a background with a color computer, and he's wanting to learn 6502 assembly to write something for the NES or the Nintendo Entertainment System. And so the project he's picked is that he wants to port Steve York's Popcorn over to the NES. I'm pretty sure the NES already has Avalanche or whatever it was that Popcorn was inspired by. But, whatever. He's doing it for his own purposes. I think that's pretty cool. And it's always cool to see, one of our CoCo brethren flap their wings somewhere else. Oh, cool. All right, well, moving on. So here's one that's just kind of cool for the retro-ness of it. It's a Hackaday link. Author is John Baketal. Not familiar with him. Anyway, Atari 2600 in a game cartridge. And so what somebody has done is gutted an Atari 2600 game cartridge and mounted a Pi Zero computer inside and hooked up a few things to interface it to joysticks and to give it some I/O so that it can run an Atari game emulator, I guess. Let's see. It says he's using the RetroPie operating system and the Stella emulator. So he's got an Atari 2600, but it's actually an emulated Atari 2600, and it's in the form factor of an Atari 2600 cartridge. So I don't know, kind of cool, neat little arts and crafts project, whatever. Not CoCo at all, but hey, worth seeing what's outside and other people are doing too, right?
I saw the same thing was done not too long ago with a NES. It was a Nintendo cartridge. They used the Back to the Future cartridge.
Oh, yeah.
Someone mounted the console in there.
How appropriate.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
I'm always amazed that it's worth going to the link just to see the good job they did on the graphics on the label with the ports and everything else. Looks really nice.
Yeah, it's well done.
They did a good job on that. Cool.
And
they have enough cartridges, from the New Mexico landfill, so they can always go back and get more.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if they need Atari 2600 cartridges, I probably got 100 of them myself somewhere. Anyway, moving on. Next link. This one, another one from Ed Snyder. This says beginning production on the CoCo PSG. That's programmable sound generator. That's his card with the AY3 8910. A couple of joystick ports. Anyway, this is when he's starting his production run. Anyway, he was just posting pictures. More recently, he posted that he's basically finishing up his production run and says he's going to try to get some other cards out into the hands of developers or something. I don't know. We'll probably have to cover that one next month. But anyway, if you want to check that out, see where his status lies, you may want to check out on the Color Computer group on Facebook where Ed kind of hangs out and see if you can get one or if you want one. So pretty cool. Okay, just a dozen more. All right, the next one coming up. This is from Rick Adams. So Rick, of course, is the author of Shanghai and Temple of Ram. And Rick's been trying to reconstruct a game that he did back in the day called Bomb Threat, where he's unfortunately misplaced the source code, and so he's having to rewrite stuff from scratch. And so he says, I'm almost done with the reconstruction. One problem remains. Can't figure out how to code the routine that makes the scoring sound as heard in the gameplay video. So that's what he had. His kids helped him find a video that they had recorded of the game playing. And so he's using that as kind of his meter stick or whatever for, what is that?
When I look at a floppy disk today, I look at something that's valuable.
Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. Okay. So anyway, so Rick's kids helped him find this gameplay video of Bomb Threat that he's using as a meter stick for whether or not he's recreated the game. And apparently he's got a sound routine that he hasn't been able to figure out how to recreate. And so basically he's asking if anybody can help him figure out how to write the code. And there's some advice in there. I actually think it sounds pretty similar to the sound that Farfall makes when you get a high score. The difference is, of course, is Farfall has a kind of gravelly sound because of, reasons. But the basic do, that kind of sound, I think that's what he's looking for. I've been meaning to see if I could write up a version of code that does that, a little more pure sound or whatever, pure tone, but hadn't got to it yet. Anyway, if you want to try your hand at it, maybe you can get your name in the source code or something. maybe he'll do a credit screen. Who knows? But if you want to be immortal, then you can go try to help Rick out. All right. So here's one that is kind of weird. Well, this is from the website Kotaku. And so this is about the Atari 2600 game Dragster. Okay? It's released in 1980 by Activision. And so there's somebody who claims a high score, a world record high score for Dragster. The claim is, I guess this is the guy's name's Todd Rogers. He claims that he got a 5.51 seconds in Dragster. Okay, fine. Well, so fast forward 30 years or whatever, and so there's people who like to do what are called speed runs, and including machine-assisted speed runs, where they try to get through a game as fast as possible, including with assistance of programs that help them execute some of the more elaborate or difficult to achieve parts so they can do the fastest possible stuff. And they analyze the code and whatever else. And I guess people have gotten down to it and they say, no, it's not possible. You can't get better than 5.61 or something like that. And so they're kind of challenging this guy's record. So David Crane, who is the author of Pitfall, among other things, I think he actually believes that the 551 is possible. So he's kind of mixed up in the story here. But like I said, that there's a lot of intrigue. Apparently, the guy that claims this high score has made claims of some other strange, excessively high scores on some other games. So his credibility is a little strained. I don't know. To me, I included it because it's kind of a ridiculous thing that we've got guys our age still arguing about this sort of stuff. But it's kind of funny. Apparently, it's even been on some network TV discussions or whatever. I'm not sure. But so anyway, it's kind of making the rounds of some of the retro podcasts. But so, what do you think? Can you imagine somebody going through? Can you imagine somebody trying to do a speed run of Popstar Pilot 30 years from now? And Strawbridge is claiming that he did a speed run and he got such and such a time, and so then there's Neil. By that time, has become an expert 6809 programmer, and he disassembles Popstar and says, "No, it's not possible. You can't possibly have done all that." Can you imagine that kind of a controversy? It'd be hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh Lord. Well, so anyway. So with that in mind, you bring a little joy to your heart. We'll move on. So here's a post from Glenn Hewlett. It says, so again, Glenn's the guy who's been tearing apart old arcade ROMs and moving them to the CoCo, or one of the guys. We've had some people, Mark McDougall's been doing that for a long time, I guess. But so Glenn says, this is something I've been looking seriously into this week, just for a bit of fun. Can anyone recognize it? And so his post, I guess it's a video, was a picture of this, what at first glance appears to be a kind of a garbled colored screen. But if those that have ever been around arcade games when they're turned on, if they've ever been around a Defender or other Williams game as it turned on, they'll probably recognize that this looks pretty similar to what's called the rug pattern test, which is an early boot screen on the early Williams games like Defender and Joust and Robotron, some of those, which curiously enough used a 6809 processor. And so Glenn's pretty strongly hinting here that he's thinking of working on doing a port of a Williams game to the CoCo 3.
I hope it's
so
Defender.
That's something. Oh yeah.
I'm hoping it's Defender just because it's just a cool game. Love to see it on the CoCo 3.
So very cool. All right. So moving on. So here's kind of a weird one. It seems like I say that for all the 6502 ones. That's a weird one. This is a Hackaday link from authors Al Williams. So somebody has got a little application running out there in the cloud, shall we say, and it's set up so that if you package up 6502 machine code, shall we say, and encode it in JSON of all things, and send it off to this service running in the cloud, it'll execute the code and then send you back a JSON for a memory dump of the results. So,
a little bit convoluted.
Well, if you can't be bothered to have an actual 6502 machine running on your desk, and if you can figure out how to do all the JSON and encoding and decoding and whatever, you can execute 6502 code in the cloud. So, I don't know. That's kind of I'm not sure why you do that, but it's kind of cool is my kind of thinking. And I'd love to see somebody do that for the 6809. So, any DevOps people in the crowd, feel free to do that and send me a link. So,
I wish my life was cool enough that would have been a useful thing for me.
Very cool. All right. Well, moving on. Again, another Hackaday link. Author Dan Maloney. Don't know him. Old chart recorder becomes single pixel scanner. Now, this one I included because I saw a chart recorder. I don't know if it's the same guy or not, but I saw one for sale on eBay, and I told all the guys, there's got to be a way to use this for something cool. And,
Yeah.
None of us could figure out what that would be. But this is kind of cool. I'm not sure this is something I'd want to do, but still kind of cool. Anyway, he's basically repurposed this looks a lot like a scanner bed or whatever, but the movement of the arms and whatever, and he's attached a single pixel RGB scanner, some kind of image scanner on there, whatever. He's turned it into a very slow scanner. That's what it amounts to, where you can image scanner. And so, I don't know, I'm a little jealous just because it's such a ridiculous thing to do. But kind of funny.
Yeah, it is cool.
All right. So moving on, something almost equally as ridiculous. Another Hackaday link, also from Brian Benchoff again. This is 2-bit astrophotography, he calls it. So what we've got is someone has taken a Game Boy camera. If you remember these, it's probably one of the earliest digital cameras to actually make its way into the hands of normal people, dating back to around 1998 or something like that.
That's how we did selfies back then.
Right. So it's black and white too, right? Or grayscale. Right. I guess it must be grayscale.
Yeah.
So anyway, so somebody's taken one of these Game Boy cameras and strapped it to a telescope, and they're using it for taking pictures of the sky. I don't know. Is that practical? Does it need to be practical? Who knows? I include it partly because the Game Boy camera, I've looked into it in the past. It's the kind of thing that you could interface to your CoCo if you were interested enough to do it. So hopefully this will inspire somebody to take up that challenge and do something equally as useless with it.
Well, I do have a few extra of them kicking around here, so.
Oh, yeah? I could use one. Why don't you send me one?
All right.
You could probably trade one of those for an acoustic coupler.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Oh, man. All right. Well, so the next one, another Hackaday link, also from Brian Benchoff. See, I told you he writes a bunch of the retro stuff at Hackaday. Fixing Bugs in Ancient Basic Games is his title. And so, talking about somebody had a type-in game for something called Blind Ganger, a game where you wander a maze blindly. And he typed it in, and it didn't work, and so then he came back to it 30 years later and finally figured it out. I don't know. I imagine a lot of us have some sort of project like that where we tried something back as a kid or whatever, and then years later we come back to it and finally complete the project. I don't know. But if you've got one, I'd love to hear about it in feedback. So let us know. Okay, one more Hackaday link. This one from Jenny List. Fireworks shows the vintage Atari way. We mentioned Kevin Savitz a little bit earlier with his bongo drums. He actually has an interview of a fellow who used 8-bit Atari computers to control fireworks displays back in the day. And you can get that interview is available through the Antic podcast, I think, that feed. There's if you want to see how an 8-bit computer was used to control pyrotechnics displays, here's your portal to find out. Kind of cool. Talks about loading software in a ROM cartridge for reliability, because we know ROM cartridges are awesome. And building a custom interface board with power transistors for lighting the pyrotechnics. Pretty cool stuff. I don't know. What do you think, Neil?
I think it's awesome. Makes you want to do it on the CoCo.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I thought of.
Very cool. All right. I'm getting closer here. Moving on. Next link. This is someone named Ian Kim posting. He posted to the Apple II enthusiast group with a new simple joystick for Apple IIe/2C/2GS, whatever. But so basically what he's got is basically just a little chunk of PCB. He's got a thumbstick like from a modern game controller mounted up, and a couple of buttons, and then a connector for a wire to go off to the Apple II. And it's like, it's so simple, it's almost dumb, but I thought, well, that's kind of cool though. You can build a joystick like that, and just, you don't even need a lot of special skills for building for mounting everything up or whatever. It's really just a PCB. So I thought maybe seeing this might inspire somebody to build some new joysticks for the CoCo or the Vectrix or whatever else. So, what do you think, Mike? That's your kind of speed?
I think that's. I thought that was kind of a cool project too, like you said, because it's just so simple, but it's a useful thing.
Yeah.
You were kind of ahead of the game there, John, when you did that joystick for Farfall a long time ago.
Yeah, I did a couple of them. And, now I'm bored with that.
What keeps getting me stumped is the case. Getting a housing made for the joystick. That's the tricky part, I think.
Well, getting a housing can be kind of a problem or kind of an issue. It just sort of depends on how bad you have to get exactly what you want, and whether or not you're willing to machine an existing case, a general purpose box, or if you have to have something especially designed for your application. Anyway, moving on. This is the link of Vintage is the New Old. Paulo Garcia is the writer. Homebrew market, why people are still making NES games. Kind of a cool interview. The guy's got a Kickstarter for an NES game called Eskimo Bob. I'm actually a backer on this Kickstarter. But this guy's kind of been doing the rounds. I think this guy has actually got his own podcast now. It's something about homebrew for the NES podcast or something like that. But anyway, I always like to see the interviews with the homebrew game authors or whatever, talking about why they do it, what their motivations are or whatever. And so, since I assume everyone else likes what I like, I included it here. So feel free to check that out. And eventually I'll get the Eskimo Bob NES cartridge, and if you want, you can come over and play.
All right, it's a date.
Have a party.
All right. Okay, so here's a link that I think is pretty cool, given my involvement with the Little Red cartridge designs. This is developing your own cartridge game for the MSX. And of course, that's a retro computer design that was more popular in Japan, I guess. So anyway, it says you should read this. Another one from Paulo Garcia. If you click into the actual article at MSX Center, it talks about, I think it's 3 different people who are kind of doing what we've been talking about, kind of helping people do homebrew games that want to publish on cartridge, and talks about what the options are and how much they cost, how the different the designs. They've actually got 3 different physical designs for their plastic cases, and some of them offer cartridge circuit boards if you need them, and what the options are. So a couple of things that stood out for me is I thought it was cool. One of the ones that offers circuit boards, you can either get a regular ROM circuit board, or you can get one with a sound chip. Guess which sound chip they can get on it? Yes, the SN76489. So the same chip that I picked for my cartridge apparently appealed to someone else for ostensibly for the same reasons. Another thing I thought was kind of interesting is if you look at the pricing, how these completely independent sources came out with prices for their various cartridge options that not only are pretty close to what each other charges, they're actually pretty close to what we're charging for our injection molded cartridges. So, I think it verifies that we're giving you a pretty decent deal, or at least as good a deal as someone else will give you. Let's put it that way. So anyway, so nice validation of the market, I think, if nothing else. And if you really are thinking about doing a cartridge design on your own, so kind of gives you an idea of what the economics are for a different retrocomputing community, but still kind of the same issues. So the final link here, the YouTube video, says floppy disks are sort of still a thing. And so if you watch the video, it's a guy who's is the last man standing in the floppy disk business. It's president of floppydisk.com. He says he's the last guy in the business basically because he forgot to get out of it. And so if you've thought about buying from floppydisk.com, maybe it's just interesting to see what's going on there. Things that stood out to me, they're not making any more floppy disks. So he's literally running a big recycling kind of operation. And it's not recycling. He's not chopping them up or anything. It's literally more like a recovery operation where he's taking the floppy disk and, possibly reconditioning them, if you will, I guess, peeling the labels off or whatever he's doing, reformatting the ones and evaluating whether or not they held their formats and then selling them back out. So anyway, I thought it was kind of cool. It's actually not a very new video, but I recently came across it. So if you're looking for a source for floppy disks, maybe this will help you out. Or maybe it's just a curiosity to see how somebody manages to stay in the floppy disk business in 2017 or 2015 when the video was made. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our news segment.
We have one more. We just got it. Last piece of news just came in, hot off the press. From Dennis Bathory Kits. I think that's how you pronounce his name.
Yeah.
It says, "Hi all. I just signed up member 550. That's an all-time high for this CoCo list. That's kind of cool."
Woohoo!
Cool.
Yes, I saw that too. I'm glad you added it in.
All right. So very cool. So there. With that news, 550 members of the CoCo list. That says a membership record. With that good news, then we will take another break, and then we'll be back with our feedback segment.
Idaho. Margaret Winston powers up her color computer to play her favorite cartridge game. But somehow, what should appear blue appears red, and the colors will not return to normal until after several consecutive presses of the reset button. It's dismissed as coincidence. Kansas. A man dials his favorite BBS from his color computer. 1,200 miles away at the exact same moment, a man witnesses his modem take the phone line off hook all by itself. Just chance, or are there other unseen forces at work? Florida. A man powers on his color computer 3, not realizing that his pet cat is standing on the keyboard. He leaps back in shock as the ghoulish image of microware engineers appear on the screen. It's dismissed as imagination. Now Time Life Books announces an important new library, Mysteries of the Color Computer, a series that explores the most controversial phenomena of the color computer and tells you everything that can be known. The Midwest. A mother feels terrible dread fall upon her.
No.
Far away at that exact same moment, her daughter screams as she inadvertently deletes a Telewriter 64 document. Just chance? Or is it telling us something about our own untapped capability? Mysteries of the Color Computer goes deeper into unexplained phenomena than ever before. It documents the facts and uncovers what people were never willing to talk about. Texas. Tandy documents are unearthed that describe an unknown 160 by 200, 256 color mode for the Color Computer 3, but ancient engineering notes allude to a 300 by 200, 256 color mode. To date, no 256 color mode has been found. Some believe that a 256 color mode exists, while others dismiss it as myth. Is it real or just imagination? To experience Mysteries of the Color Computer, examine your first volume, Mysterious Silicon, for 10 days free. Then decide whether you wish to dismiss it. To order your first book, Mysterious Silicon, call 1-800-6309. Examine it for 10 days. Pay just $12.99 plus $2.98 shipping and handling. Other books will follow, one about every other month. Keep only the ones you want. Cancel at any time. Call 1-800-6309.
All right, now it's time for some feedback. We have one message here coming from Jim Gary, and he says, "John, in your latest broadcast, Kevin Braun asked about making sounds on MC10. Here are some vids of some helpful programs," and he's got a link, and then here's another link. And a utility for editing and generating sound statements. On the VMC10 emulator, when you print them, they just go to a text file generated by the emulator, which is really useful for then integrating into basic programs and quick typing back into the emulator. And another link to a YouTube video. And here, a link to all my files as waves on Google. And he's got a link into Google Drive. So Jim being very helpful, trying to help with the gentleman asked about how to make sound on his MC10 that he picked up at the Hollywood prop sale. So hopefully that's working out for everyone. And if nothing else, so we got some good links there for anybody else who might be interested in programming on the MC10. Okay, so then here's the next one is kind of the big elephant in the room, or whatever. Thread on the CoCo mailing list, started by Dave Phillipson, but a lot of people were part of it. Linville's ramblings on assembly versus machine code, and so kind of figured that I was opening a little bit of a can of worms. I still am a little flabbergasted that this discussion has so much legs. As I tell you, it's still, despite all the discussion, I'm still basically unmoved, in my opinion, that you're trying to make a distinction between machine code as numbers and assembly code. That's really the only distinction, is one's numbers and the other's letters. But as far as the language in terms of, when you're trying to express instructions or whatever, even if you're writing in the numbers, in your head, you're still saying to yourself, I'm going to load the A register. I'm going to store from the A register out to memory, that sort of thing. A lot of examples cited. Some of them are pretty superfluous, in my opinion. It's saying, you need to know that some memory is data and some memory is code. Well, you need to know that. I don't think that makes you really any, just writing in assembly language, you need to know that. That's why you use org statements. Someone else saying, well, when you're disassembling stuff, you have to know the encoding. You say, well, okay, but like James Jones pointed out, that's really the job of the disassembler. So, I mean, can it be helpful? Well, sure, it can be helpful. I think most of what you'd need, you'll pick up. My real point was John Mark's original question, which was really just about how to use ZBug. But his original question kind of implied that somebody was in an assembly language class where they're trying to start with let's do a little machine language and then you can move on to assembly language. And it's kind of the equivalent of when you go to a math class and, they want to teach you, they want to teach you the hard way that nobody actually ever does. And you do that for a week or so. And then they say, well, now that you know the way that nobody actually does it, let us teach you the way people actually do these problems. And so, can you skip that part? Well, yeah, most students probably could skip that part. And that's kind of was my point is, well, again, my point really is it's the same language, whether it's numbers or letters, and, it's just a different encoding. But, most of the other examples I think kind of break down. And so unless you're just really a diehard insisting that using the numbers somehow makes it a different language, I think we can largely, just agree that, okay, it's good to know that there are numbers involved. But, hopefully we can agree that most people don't need to use them. And so the only real difference, that kind of pops up there is, well, if you're going to write self-modifying code, then, yeah, you need to know the encodings. Okay, you probably shouldn't be writing self-modifying code either. But there are reasons to do it, and I'll get into that a little bit later in the show. But so anyway, there's my reply. I'm happy to know that people are listening, and happy to think I got some of them thinking enough that they were motivated to have a long thread on the mailing list. So very cool. It's good to know people are out there listening. I think that's all the feedback we really have this month. So I'm going to take another little break, and we'll be back with the rest of the show. Myro. It'll catch on.
Hold tight while we pause for the cause.
Tuesday on CoCo TV, we're back with everyone's favorite off-the-wall Radio Shack store manager.
260518.
When are you going to be finished with this inventory? I want you to take me out tonight.
260528. 260532.
More like 26-dog.
An outrageous new 103 Main Street. Then join Miss Wilson as she teaches America's most unruly 6th grade computer class.
Today, we are going to be talking about the order of operations. Oh, what a wonderful display of gestures. Now, there are 4 operations.
It's a brand new Metro City Elementary, right after 103 Main Street. Tuesdays on CoCo TV.
Radio Shack has big news. It's the new Tandy Color Computer 3. It has 128K of memory built in. Choose from a palette of 64 brilliant colors. The keyboard features new function keys. And with the new CM8 RGB monitor, takes full advantage of the Color Computer 3's 80-column text mode. And best of all, your local Radio Shack dealer has them right now, along with a complete line of other Radio Shack and Tandy computers. When you see them, you'll know why Radio Shack is the biggest name in little computers.
CoCo. You don't have to boot up OS 9. Now that we're older, we like to play deck B games. They're alright. CoCo. You don't have to boot that disc tonight. We'll play some Farfall or take Popstar Pilot for a flight. CoCo. You don't have to boot up OS 9. CoCo. You don't have to boot up OS 9. CoCo, boot up OS OS 9. CoCo boot up 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 OS 9. Oh!
Here's a color computer monitor bargain from your nearby Radio Shack. Save $50 on our exclusive Tandy CM8 RGB analog color monitor. Only $249.95 during this sale. It's designed specifically for the Color Computer 3. It's a perfect complement to the superb graphics capabilities of the Color Computer 3 and produces sharp, crisp text and dazzling graphs and illustrations. The sale price Tandy CM8 color monitor. Only at Radio Shack, a Tandy company.
All right, welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. As you know, we have a guest with us today, Mr. Jim Brain. Jim has made some cool products available in the CoCo community and has been an attendee at some CoCo Fests and has otherwise been a good asset to the community lately. So we thought we'd have him on, talk to Jim, see what makes him tick here. And so, Jim, welcome to the show, or welcome again, or welcome back. We had you there for our earlier segments. So, Jim, maybe you could just give us an introduction, who you are, kind of where you're coming from, and why you're part of the retro community. What brought your attention to the CoCo?
So, I have a pretty unique last name. A lot of people tend to make fun about that. When I was growing up, I was intelligent and I had to wear glasses because I was nearsighted and I wasn't very good at sports. So I fit the typical nerd scenario right there when I was growing up. And I grew up in the 80s, so I had a lot of access to home computers. So I wanted an Atari 2600 when I was the 80s started, 81, 80, sometime whenever they were the most popular. Everybody else wanted one. I wanted one too. I tell the story a lot of times. My dad's like, no, I'm not going to let you buy a video game machine. If you're going to buy something that's going to play games, you need to buy a home computer. That way, when you get done with playing games, you can write some code on it and whatnot. And so initially, obviously, I was very unhappy with him because I was like, man, I just want to play the games that everybody else is playing. But I did get a home computer and started writing software on it, and then ended up becoming kind of my true calling. And so I took a bunch of computer classes in high school, and then graduated, and then went to university and became a computer engineering. Had a bachelor's degree in computer engineering. So my specialty, actually, from a university perspective, is designing hardware. But as with a lot of things, life gives you a few curveballs, and one for me was software jobs paid better when I got out of college, and so I took some software work after I got out of college, and so that worked great for a while. But a number of years later, when my daughter was born, or actually my wife was pregnant with my daughter, I realized that it had been about 10 years or so since I had done anything related to computers or hardware. And I was worried that if I didn't do something with hardware soon, like in the next few months or something, I was going to basically have to, my knowledge was just going to disappear. I was going to get too far out of it, and I would never be able to get back. So I was sitting down in the basement, looking at all. I'd left some of the classic computers that I enjoyed working with. I'd kind of left them set up in the basement, and I realized that it would be kind of neat to try to interface something to one of those old computer systems. And so I thought, well, that would be a way to kind of pass some time while the pregnancy was progressing and expecting our daughter, and also kind of keep my hardware skills up to speed. And so I thought, you know what, I've always wondered what the FAT file system is like and how IDE drives work, and I'll see if I can interface an IDE drive to a to a computer system, to a home computer, and that was kind of the start of the journey that ends up, right here. So as with probably a lot of people, it's just a hobby. You try it out for a little bit. You're kind of working at it. You've got some success, and you go online to the internet, and you go to a forum or a mailing list or whatever, and you say, "Hey, look at this cool thing." And then somebody like John Linville talks about it on a CoCo Crew podcast or something like that. And then people start sending you emails and say, "Hey, can I buy this thing that you've developed?" And you're like, "Well, it was just an idea. It was just a hobby. It's just a prototype." And they're like, "No, I really want one. I'll give you $75 if you can build me one." And then they just keep coming in. People start sending you checks and cash in the mail, and all of a sudden you're kind of in business. And then eventually it gets to the point where you can't just do it onesie twosie anymore, and then you end up with a web store, and you end up with a PayPal account, and you end up taking credit cards, and then you go to shows and you sell stuff, and then you end up at CoCo Fest and Tandy Assembly, and people know your name, and you're kind of a minor celebrity. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell.
Very cool. So, just a side note, you wouldn't happen to be related to Marshall Brain, would you?
I know Marshall Brain, but at my knowledge, I'm not related to him. So
okay.
there's few brains in the United States, but most of them are not related.
Yeah, no, I think he's still working at NC State now. He was the cool. He was a few years older than me, so he was like the cool, freshly minted PhD at NC State when I was starting school. And then he went on to do, what was it, How Stuff Works or whatever it is that he's done.
Yeah.
But,
yep.
Anyway, well, that's cool. So most of your work done, at least in the past, with Commodore computers? Is that correct?
Well, yeah, my first machine was a Commodore machine, predominantly because it was it was the cheapest machine I could get my hands on. I think I got a unit back in it seems like it was 82 or some time frame, 81 or 82, and I've always had an affinity for Radio Shack. It's kind of a shame that I kind of viewed the Radio Shack that I remember as kind of having died quite a few years ago when they switched to being cell phone carriers basically. But in the 80s, my family would go to the mall, and they would leave me at the local Radio Shack, and I would have $20 or $25 of spending money, and I would spend like an hour or two going over to the little racks grabbing CMOS ICs or various little things that I could pick up and do build something with, and I'd put stuff back, and I'd change the dollars amount so that I could make sure I get it under $20. And I always saw the CoCos there. And even before that, I saw the Model 1s and the Model 3 and 4 and so forth. I guess the Model 1 I saw before that, but I saw the units there, but they were kind of too expensive for me. So I started out with the Commodores because the VIC-20 was even cheaper than the CoCo 1, I think, at the time when it came out. Mm-hmm. And then I progressed. The progression in the Commodore line was to go to a Commodore 64. And I used a 64 up until my junior year of college. So that would have been 1992. And then I finally got a PC and started doing stuff with PCs. But my CoCo travels happened, I don't say by accident, but I was at a Vintage Computer Festival. We talked about those earlier. And I was at a Midwest show probably in 2014 or 2013 or something. And somebody had a TI 994A with a peripheral expansion box, which is kind of an interesting item, and they had a CoCo 3. And so I said, you know what, I'd kind of like to learn more about these other technologies. And so I made an offer. We dickered for a while, and I got both of the units, and I sat them here for probably a year, and then finally sat down and realized that the only way I tend to learn about these machines is to basically try to build something for them. So that was when I started working on CoCo Flash and the MPI.
Cool. So I don't know. I sense you're being modest, though. My impression is in the Commodore community, you're like the Ed Snyder of the Commodore community.
I do have. I have quite a few. I mean, I think the key is, I like we talked about earlier. It's kind of an art form to develop and distribute or manufacture stuff for the classic computing environment. It doesn't really matter which type it is, but whatever it is you decide to do, there's the idea of coming up with something that people will actually buy, and then there's the idea of figuring out a way to make it in such a way that it is not going to kill you to build it, right? I see Ed building the units, right? And, I think he solders them up by hand, and he makes like 10 or 12 of them at a time and whatnot. And more power to him to do that. But I did that for maybe, I don't know, 6 months or so when I first started out. And I said, oh, this is nuts. I cannot do this. I got way too many. I got little kids running around. I got house that needs work. I got a lot of things going on. I don't ever get down to the basement until maybe 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I don't have time to sit there with a soldering iron for 3 or 4 hours, soldering up stuff, or even do, I think he bakes his in an oven using surface mount or whatever. But still, it's you got to find a way to make that stuff so you can have somebody else do the assembly, and you got to find out, what's the cheap parts to use. So, But the key is once you do that, you can come up with some products that are relatively inexpensive, and so that's what I did. I said, okay, well, I'll build these 100 at a time, and I will have them professionally assembled, and then I'll send them out to people who are interested in them, and it turns out that if you can hit all those, kind of targets, right? You make something that's relatively inexpensive and something that a great number of people will buy, and you provide reasonable customer service for it, then you'll catch a lot of people, and a lot of people will, come back and want more stuff. And the money they give you, then if you don't like immediately need that money, you can take that money and you can put it in a pile, and you can say, this money is going to be used to fund additional projects. So one of the first things that I did after I got one of the Commodore products done is I bought some equipment like logic analyzer and oscilloscope and stuff like that. And then the next batch of money that I got from sales, a lot of times people have to buy cables. Cables are a big deal. And Neil knows this, right? Buying and building the cables for the joystick adapters and whatnot. It's a very time-consuming manual process, and you can get those cables professionally manufactured, but you can't buy them by the dozens, right? You got to buy them by the thousands. And so in the Commodore space, a lot of the things that people have trouble is they have very special cables for the serial drives and the printers. And printers aren't that important, but the disk drives are really important in the Commodore arena. And people buy a disk drive, but the cable never comes with it. And there's 2 cables on a disk drive. One is the power cord, which is just a bog standard, a 3-prong PC style power cord, which you can get anywhere. But the cable that connects the computer to the disk drive is proprietary, and they don't really sell those. They're 6-pin DIN. They don't. That they're not like DIN cables like for MIDI, and they're not like cables for like PC keyboards. So none of that stuff will work. And so that's one of the things I did is I contracted with a manufacturer overseas, and I said, I'm going to buy a lot of cables. And he says, well, you can buy as many cables as you want and however configuration you want, but you have to buy 2,000 meters worth of cable. And that's a lot of cable. 2 kilometers worth of cable is a lot of cable. But yeah. I mean, you get molded ends, and you can specify, exactly what kind of what the cable looks like, and what kind of gauge of wire it uses, and all that. So the key is that when you do that sort of stuff, then you're kind of the one-stop shop for things that people have to have, right? There's a lot of things that are nice to haves, but nobody can really do anything without a cable. And so then that gives you a guaranteed group of people that say, oh, you know what, if you want to get this and you just want to start out, make sure you talk to Jim, because he's got cables and he's got a little disk drive thing and he's got a little flash cartridge and he's got all the basic stuff to set you up. And then once you get going, you can maybe buy some of these more esoteric things. But if you don't have a ton of money and you want to get going quick and you want to play around with your machine, then you should check out Jim. He's got a nice professional website and he's got good customer service. And I'll be honest with you, most of the time nowadays, I think you can get a great reputation in the classic community arena just by being there, right? Because there's a lot of, I don't know how, I haven't been as long in the CoCo or the color computer arena, but in the Commodore arena, at least, there's a lot of these people that show up and they're like fly-by-night operators, right? They show up and they have this really cool product and it promises all kinds of things, like it'll make espresso and it'll do your dishes and it'll wash your clothes and whatever it will, right? And so everybody wants it and they send a whole bunch of money to this person, and then the person just like disappears, or the first units are horrible and people want to return them because they don't do what they're supposed to do. And then the person says, no, you bought it, you own it, I'm not taking returns. And it just leaves a really bad taste in people's mouth. And so one of the ways that you can have a great reputation in the community is just to kind of be long-standing in the community, like take back products that don't work and fix things that are wrong and refund people's money when they feel like they didn't get what they wanted, and just kind of be there and present all the time. I stay on the forums and I'm available. And so that, I think that goes a long way. It's not so much that you have such great products, maybe, but it's that at least whatever you do have, you don't oversell it. And when people say, I want to buy something else, they're more inclined to buy from somebody that they had a reasonable experience with the last time.
Great points.
Definitely good. Neil, Mike, you got anything to ask?
I'm curious. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so Jim, you're developing on two platforms now, the Commodore, I guess VIC-20 and 64, and also now the CoCo. Which one do you prefer, or do you like them both equally in different ways?
Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to play around with the CoCo is there's some very interesting things with the color computer. You know, that it's really kind of cool to understand. It's maybe more like digital archaeology or digital forensics, I think, because as you start to develop products for a platform, you start to get an idea of what was the focus when they put the machine together. What were they trying to accomplish? What trade-offs did they make? On the Commodore platform, the graphics and sound are all on board, and so and there's some special items, some special cool features with the Commodore line that you can kind of play around with and whatnot. But I was kind of looking at, well, what do the other platforms have? Because there's a community around all the main platforms, right? Apple has a community we talked about earlier with Kansas Fest, and of course that's a whole community there. And there's a TI community, and there's an Atari community, and there's a color computer community, and there's just all these different communities. Why did they center themselves around a particular product? What was the kind of cool feature of a particular unit? And so that's the reason I started working with the color computer. So I don't know it's that I like one versus the other, more or less. I think the idea is probably the color computer is more interesting to me right now because I don't know as much about it. And so I can take more of an opportunity to learn, more new things about the color computer. I will say that one of the things I found as I kind of have one foot in one community and one foot in another community is the communities have a kind of a distinct DNA. So the Commodore community has a special DNA, and I've noticed the color computer community has a slightly different DNA, and the products themselves are different. Just as I develop for it. So things that maybe only John would know, but when you go to design a cartridge for the color computer, every time I go to set one up in the CAD program, I curse whoever it is at Motorola that originally designed the or well, it wouldn't be Motorola. The cartridge port was probably added by Tandy, but I curse whoever did the cartridge port, because on most cartridge designs, TI and Commodore and so forth, they put the grounds on both ends of the connector, and they put power like right next to the ground, and so you can run power and ground, right around the outside of your board without any problem. But Tandy put the ground in the middle, and they put the power like way in the middle too, basically. And so you got to find a way right away to get ground all the way from the middle of the cartridge all the way out to the end, and then you got to do the same thing for power. So it's just annoying. I mean, it's just an annoyance. There's a lot of cool things about it, but just little things that you'd only know if you're a hardware designer. It's just an irritant every time you start a CoCo cartridge design.
Right. And that's a cool way to learn, like you were saying, by getting into the machine, by designing products, you're going to learn it so much better.
Yep.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's, it's neat that there's neat that there's different, there's the CoCo 1, and then there's the CoCo 2 and the CoCo 3, and then you have the various different kind of basics and whatnot. I'll be honest with you. In some respects, I feel a little spoiled, because everybody railed for years in the Commodore arena because all the Commodore computers basically had the same version of BASIC, and it was a crappy version of BASIC, right? It was like the original version of BASIC for the CoCo 1 was the same version that Commodore had everywhere, and so it really forced programmers in the Commodore space to move to assembly language or machine language, depending on how you and John sort that out, right? But either way, you didn't write stuff in BASIC because you couldn't get anywhere with BASIC. I mean, you could, but it would just you were an exercise in Sado. It was really a complex and frustrating affair to write a lot of stuff in BASIC. But but at least you knew that if you walked up to a VIC-20 or a PET, most of the PETs, or even the 128 or the 65, or sorry, the +4 or the 64 or whatever, you knew all the same commands would work. Basic V2 was always the same. You could always get to the same things. I struggle at times to understand kind of the color computer community, in that, when you get to a program, is it color basic? Is it extended color basic? Is it disk basic? Is it this disk extended color basic? I mean, there's just so many variations, and I'm not prepared for that. That's a little bit. It's really stunted my ability to get into basic on the machine, because I'm like, I don't even know if I can. I mean, I got a CoCo 3, and so I can do color. I can do the disk extended color basic here, but all the other ones, I have no idea whether what I write would work on somebody else's machine or not. I'd probably just give up.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. That it would have been nice if they'd have had like a VERC command or something, or you could at least get a quick idea of what you were running on.
That's right.
Mike, what were you? You had something in mind.
It escapes me. I had a question, but I forgot it.
Maybe you'll remember it.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I was going to try to bait you into comparing the Commodore community to the color computer guys, but you kind of just cleverly negotiated that one. So, well, let's see. What do you think? Just in terms of health of the community or whatever. I mean, do you see any long-term problems or anything developing in the color computer community, or do you think we're pretty healthy overall, or do you have any comments along that line?
I think it's great that there's so much interest. I'll be honest with you. One of the things that I'm struggling with is the fact that I'm pretty good at hardware, and so I can, hardware is not I don't really have a problem, and I've gotten pretty good at developing hardware that will work with with an 8-bit line, whether it be the color computer, or whether it be the Commodore line or whatnot. Software's a little tougher because You know, I never was extremely competent in writing machine language, and so at the earliest possible opportunity, I switched to writing in C, and so that's great for PCs and all, but that doesn't work nearly as well for the limited capabilities of some of the 8-bit platforms. But even at that, if I'm focusing energy, I'm probably going to focus energy on hardware, because that's where I've got a great ability to deliver products in a short amount of time. But it's rare that something that can be just hardware. So, like with the CoCo Flash, I partnered up with Barry, and he wrote the software and I took care of the hardware and whatnot. But I feel like sometimes I'm struggling to support people because I think they really want to ask more software related questions, like, Jim, how would I do this and whatnot, and I don't really know how to answer them. I'm like, listen, I can tell you all about how the thing interacts with the 6809, but as far as how to write code or whatnot, and what's the best way to execute the 6809 assembly to make whatever you want to do work, it's my hat's off to people like Ed Snyder, who probably have more of both halves of that. He can write code for the 6809 platform, and he's got a good handle on hardware design. So that's great. I mean, I'm glad for him. I wish I knew more about how to write the software, and I wish I had more time to do some of the software development justice. But to me, that's a struggle because it raises the bar for people like myself to come in and develop, because it's tough to have an innate grasp of the mechanical or the electronic aspects of the unit, and then also have a good grasp of how to achieve performant application runtime on the software side. Like we talked earlier about the Pac-Man clone, right? The transcoded Pac-Man clone, and all the work that went into making that performant. That took months. I think it's like 6 months he's been working on that code base, and that's great. I mean, he's done a great job of that, and I saw the demo, and it's very smooth, and he's pulled out all the stops, and he's used all the tricks, and he's got everything going in there, and he's had a lot of help from the software group. But not necessarily to get into the baiting that you talked about, but it seems easier for me to find people in the Commodore arena that can say, hey, if you'll design the hardware, we'll tackle the software side of things. And it's been a little bit difficult to find folks who are interested in putting together the hardware, or putting together the software for hardware designs. And I'm a little leery of putting more hardware designs out there, because I worry that if you put the hardware out there and you invest in the hardware and then nobody invests in software to drive it, then you really don't have a product. You have something that always has potential, but it's unrealized potential. So that's, to me, a challenge. I think I think some of the things that I see as challenging are there seems to be a significant amount of drama around FPGA versions of color computing devices. So I haven't really got into the middle of that, and I do some HDL programming, but I don't know that I have enough knowledge to develop an entire clone of a color computer in FPGA. But one of the things I struggle with, I think, on a lot of the projects is when I started up my company, for what it's worth, I decided that every project I was going to develop was going to be open source, because there was nothing more frustrating or disappointing than to look at a Commodore peripheral that you really wanted and somebody say, well, the person who sold that peripheral no longer makes them. They quit. Like 4 or 5 years ago, they quit making them. And there's no plans, there's no designs, there's no way to revisit that. If you want to build it, you're going to have to completely reverse engineer it and then start over from scratch to implement the solution. And that just really that's just a disappointing day when you find some cool new peripheral or cartridge or whatever that does something really neat, and you'd want to add it to your to your environment. And then people say, yeah, well, unless you can find one on eBay, or you can find somebody who has one and doesn't want to buy it or doesn't want it anymore, then you're never going to be able to own it. And so one of the things I decided is all the designs I made, I was going to put them out I was going to make them all open source. And then that way, if I ever decide, because there will come a time when, I'll probably move on to something else, or maybe I'm just physically not here, at least the designs will continue to exist. And then people can pull up the files and whatnot and say, oh, well, we want to build this again, or we want to make a new version of it. Well, here's the original files. You can go and make a new version of it. Or I see a lot of the products in the CoCo space. There's a significant number of them, especially the more complex products that are not open source. And I think long term that's going to be a challenge for the community, because people's interest in the platform is sometimes not constant. And so they drift in and they have a great passion for the platform, and then life gets in the way or starts to chip away at their free hours, and then eventually they say, you know what, I need to focus on other things. And when they're not there, what do you do? If they had a great product or a great solution for a problem, and they're not around to produce it anymore, and if the design's not available for somebody else to produce, then it's just sort of lost.
No, definitely, you're preaching to the choir for me on that one for sure. I wish, it'd be one of those things. If I could suddenly rule the world, that'd be one of the rules I'd impose, I guess. Is everybody need to make that thing sort of, take that sort of design philosophy. So anyway, you mentioned, some of your projects. Do you want to take an opportunity to plug anything in particular? I know you mentioned CoCo Flash. We mentioned that earlier. Looking at the latest Glenside newsletter, there were a couple of things that were listed there, a couple of things I'd seen from you, and a couple of things that were not as familiar. Are you ready? Are you able to talk about all the things that were in the newsletter, or?
Oh yeah, they're in the newsletter, and I mean, John Mark was like, hey, what kinds of things? I got a whole bunch of pictures of stuff at CoCo Fest, and I'd like to put a little bit more detail around them. And I said, sure, that's fine. And some of them people know about, like CoCo Flash, and I haven't necessarily seen the uptick or uptake on the product as I was necessarily hoping. I mean, I've seen some usage of it, but if Ed's got the Orchestra 90 cartridges that are moving kind of quickly, then I suppose maybe I need to refocus my marketing and tell people, hey, if nothing else, you can get an Orchestra 90 work-alike for $50. Buy one from Jim and get yourself a case, and you're good to go. And the Flash thing is just kind of an added bonus, right?
Right.
But, because it supports the Orchestra 90 capability just as well as the original cartridge does. I think one of them that was at the show, and it's done and ready to produce, but I just haven't moved forward with it, is I have a CoCo, I can't remember, it's CoCo, UART or CoCo, whatever, I can't remember what I called it, but
CoCo Link,
yeah, CoCo Link, right? So, and it's got it's work-alike for the RS-232 pack, supports the same address range and whatnot, and adds 57K, 115K, and 230K BPS rates. So, you can have some really fast speeds on your CoCo if you want. One of the things I thought about doing with that, and actually had been working on that, was to implement you guys had mentioned the Wi-Fi 232 functionality, and I thought about adding that capability to the cartridge and then producing it as basically a Wi-Fi cartridge for the CoCo. But that one's not so much it's a done design. I just kind of haven't decided whether to push it into production or not. The NIC, the CoCo network interface card, that's another one where it's done more or less done, and basically just need to find somebody to write a little bit of software to go alongside that unit. I know Brett Gordon's been working on some. I can't think what it's called. It's not Linux, or what's the Fusix. That's right, Fusix. But that's still pretty developmental, and I don't know a lot of people who are running that environment. So like some OS 9 drivers, or something that people could use from call from BASIC or whatnot would be kind of helpful. So that's another cartridge that I kind of have to make some decision about whether to move forward. And like I said, I'm a little hesitant to push that forward into people who can write some software for it, or at least feel like they can support it a little bit. Probably the one that in the Glenside article that got a lot of people thinking is CoCo Mem, which I kind of wanted to understand I wanted to learn a couple different things. One was how the additional memory is accessed in the CoCo 3, and also wanted to see. I saw some of the older disto or whatever environments, and how they had to have you socket the 6809 so you could put a special board on there, and then you had to replace you had to plug something into the 512K board slot on the CoCo 3, and there's a whole bunch of work necessary to get that set up. And I just looked at the schematic one night and realized that if I could pop out the gimme and put something in that place, and then put the gimme into the daughter board, then I might have a way to do a significant RAM upgrade without having to do a whole bunch of jumpers or extra boards or whatnot, because the gimme is always socketed, so makes it a little easier to do upgrades. I think that one's the one where I'm kind of interested. The MPI is I've got, like I indicated on the we were talking earlier, the MPI has been in development for a while, and I've got a new set of boards, but right now it's summer, and summer always tends to take a significant amount of time away from doing CoCo projects, but I'm hopeful to get back to it here in a little bit, get some of those projects done. I'd like to get some of them done for Tandy assembly, or maybe even have one or more of them ready to go for the Vintage Computer Festival Midwest, because there's a significant number of color computer folks that attend that on a regular basis.
Sure. Cool. Well, what have we not covered? Mike, did you ever get your idea back?
No, I didn't. Sorry.
Nia, you still out there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm really enjoying this interview, actually.
Yeah, so, very much.
I'm looking forward to those products you mentioned there, Jim. The MPI, that's going to be a hot seller.
Yeah, I think it is. Although nice thing. One of the reasons why I started in on the MPI is, so it was my first project that I started on, because as I started researching the CoCo, I realized that you could put multiple cartridges in a CoCo, and you've been able to put multiple cartridges in a lot of machines, but most of the machines use just a simple port expander, right? For most of the platforms, you just get this little passive PC board. It could be dressed up with a little case, but basically it's this PC board, and it's got whatever size your expansion connector is. It's got 4 or 3 or something on them, and you just kind of have to hope and pray that all the cartridges you put in the unit will all work together, right? Which more often than not doesn't work, right? More often than not, you've got 2 cartridges that share the same space or want to do the same thing or whatever, and so you don't really get to maximize the use of the expander. And so it turns out that the color computer has what I think is the most technically advanced port expander in that era of home computer. I suppose that's card slots might rival it, but as an add-on feature, I thought it was really cool, because I'm not exactly sure if they came up with the idea before they delivered the CoCo 1, or whether they delivered the CoCo 1 and then they said, you know what if people want to do a floppy drive and they want to do something else? How are we going to deal with that? Oh, you know what? We need to build this multi-pack interface functionality. And
Right.
oh, by the way, we've already shipped this product. And so it's not like we can pull them all back from consumers and figure out a way to shoehorn a bus into this device. So
Right.
when they created the multi-pack, I thought it was a really, it was an elegant idea, especially in light of the fact that you can set the port that you want to use when you boot the machine, and then when you're in the machine, the machine's turned on, you can change what port is used. So that's just a functionality that I didn't see in many of the other kind of home computer products of the era. And I thought, you know what, I'd like to learn how that works, because there may be a possibility for me to not only, at the same time I found out that MPIs are pretty scarce. And so I thought not only could I develop an MPI solution for the CoCo, but I might be able to bring the same kind of technology to other platforms as well. So bring it back to the Commodore platform and have it play a role there as well. And so that was really nice, but I did hear right away that people was like, man, this huge, the big problem with the MPI is all the cartridges seem to be backwards. And every time you touch or move your computer, you risk separating the MPI from the main unit, from the computer, and then all your hard work goes down the drain. And so that was a big kind of set the design in motion to do like a ribbon cable functionality as opposed to something that would directly plug into the unit. But I think that's probably where I bit off maybe a little bit too much. I should have probably just come up with a 4-port straight out the side design first, and then worked on the ribbon cable version, because man, the ribbon cable version it adds a layer of complexity that I wasn't anticipating, because ribbon cables they're just like little antennas, and so yeah. Signals don't really like to travel too far over ribbon cables, and so that's been a little bit of a challenge in getting the product ready to go, and ready for production. There's a certain point at where you're not ready to release a product until you're pretty sure that if you give it to Joe vintage computer user, that they're going to be able to take it home, plug it in, and actually do something interesting with it, as opposed to plug it in or take it home, plug it in, and spend the next 4 hours trying to fight some stupid bug, and they get mad and they get frustrated, and they get to the point where they almost want to take their CoCo and throw it out the window, only to find out that there's nothing wrong with their computer. It's a problem with the peripheral that I designed. And so I've been a little bit hesitant to finish up the design, because I want to make sure that it's going to be as good as, if not better than, the original MPI as far as signal and functionality and everything. But one of the things I did realize as I worked with the unit is that it's great idea. It was I have reservations about how it was implemented in the CoCo space. The whole and maybe it's due to the fact that some of the design was already set in stone before the MPI showed up. But to get a little technical, I suppose the select line, the SCS line that's in the unit, only decodes the F400 and F500 block of I/O space. And so if you have a MPI, or you have a cartridge of some type that sits in the F6 or F7 space, F600 or F700 space, FF60 space or FF70 space, as opposed to the FF40 space or FF50 space, those don't obey the MPI slot selection. They're on all the time, and so you kind of reduce the effectiveness of the MPI somewhat. And I suppose it's probably due to the CoCo design intrinsically, not the MPI design, but that's kind of a challenge. And so if you have people on the mailing list who say, hey, can you make an 8-port unit? Can you make a 16-port unit? And you're like, well, yeah, technically I can. I mean, it's possible, but yeah, but I'm not sure what the utility is. And I I struggle with that a little bit because sometimes if you design those things, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And so I struggle a little bit. I'm okay with somebody saying, "Hey, I want to try this out." I'm like, "Okay, well, the design's open source, and I can help you get started with a multi-port interface that's got 8 or 16 slots in it." But I'm not sure I'm going to bring something like that to production because I think the number of people that are going to buy it it's going to be a relatively small number of people, and on top of that, I think people are going to struggle a lot with it because they're going to load it up with 16 cartridges thinking that 16 cartridges are all going to work. And you're going to say, well, technically no, because the floppy drive controller probably needs to be in slot 4. You can't put it anywhere else. And the hard drive controller has to be one of the first floor slots because otherwise OS 9 won't find it. And you've got to have a cartridge in one of the first 4 slots because that's the only way you can get access to it when you turn on the machine. And by the time you're done, I don't think the last 4 or 12 slots are going to have much utility. People are going to have them on their desk and they won't actually have anything in them. Right. And then they'll say, well, from Jim, and it's just kind of a waste because it's it doesn't, I don't get to use any more than I would have if I just would have bought a vintage multi-pack interface. And so there's something about self-preservation of your reputation that you have to think about when you're putting some of these classic designs together, just because people can sometimes think that's a really cool idea, but then when they actually try to put it in practice, it turns out to not work.
Yeah, you want the functionality to be 100%.
Yeah. So, but it's been fun to learn about the unit. It's been fun to learn about the I've always thought the 6809 was it was one of the coolest processors, the Motorola. I don't know why they didn't continue it on in that vein. I when I was in college, I programmed with a follow-on processor called the 68HC11, which is a microcontroller, but it's kind of sort of based on the 6800 instruction set, but it's kind of it's not nearly as impressive as the 6809 assembly language, not register set, but instruction set. Mm-hmm. I thought the 6809 was a very cool processor. Like I said, there's things I really think are cool about the CoCo line, but it is kind of interesting since I have a pretty good technical understanding of both. Well, actually, I also know some stuff in the TI space as well. And so when you start to compare the different products, there's pieces of each one of the technology or each one of the platforms that are really impressive, and then there's pieces that are extremely frustrating. The sound capabilities on the CoCo is, on one hand, I really have to give credit to the individual who managed to make the DAC capability do triple purpose or whatever it is, right? On the other hand, it just seemed like really you couldn't. It wouldn't have cost that much to put a couple crazy little square wave generators on the board. Right. Especially by the time it got to the CoCo 3, couldn't you have hidden something in the gimme? Maybe you had just a little bit of space because, man, square wave generators are just dirt cheap and dirt simple to make. But of course, by that time, I guess they already had all the software and they wanted to make sure it was completely compatible. But I look at all the hoops that people jump through to get reasonable sound out of the system, and then I kind of shudder because it's just a lot of work to get sound out of the system, which is probably one of the more difficult things to do from the CoCo arena. So there's some cool parts about the platform, but then there's some kind of Achilles heel weakness type components to the platform as well. I guess it happens with all the platforms, but it's kind of interesting to see why Tandy chose or Radio Shack chose certain things they wanted to focus on, and Commodore chose certain things, and TI chose certain things, and Atari chose certain things, and they weren't the same things.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Often we kind of look fondly back to the day of when we had so many, heterogeneous combination of platforms to choose from. But that's definitely the truth. Is while each one kind of had their strengths, they each were, limited baskets. So they they had their strengths, but they usually got their strength by trading off for a weakness somewhere too. So definitely insightful. Well, Jim, what else what should we have asked, or what else have what other message might you have for us?
Trying to think. I think the community's been a great help. I'm not necessarily a question, but definitely in a statement that it's been nice to have access to the Facebook forum and the the mailing list, and to get access to information as to what's the particulars of the machine, and how it works. It's nice to be able to come to things like Tandy Assembly and CoCo Fest and be somewhat recognized and be able to kind of chit chat with folks about projects and whatnot. I think I would say I'd ask for patience. I think Ed would probably ask for the same thing, and whoever's working on projects ask for patience, because making a cartridge do something, or making a CoCo design do something is pretty easy, right? You can hack it together and get it to work on your your bench, and do a YouTube video of it, and it looks like it's like ready to go, right? It's, oh well, look, just put a cartridge case around it and ship it, right? But the path from prototype to finished product is a long and winding road, and it's not just the CoCo's environment; it's all environments. But you're competing against time, and you have setbacks. Like I said, ribbon cable's been a setback for the MPI for me, and CoCo Flash was. There were setbacks on delivering that unit, and then last minute things, right? And Barry is saying, hey, it'd be really nice if you could put Orchestra 90 capability in this cartridge, which was a good idea, and it made sense. But then it was like, okay, well, I've already laid out the whole board, and now I got to basically relay out the board, because I got to find a room. I got to find room for for all of this extra stuff that makes up the Orchestra 90 capability. And even simple things like I designed the cartridge for the CoCo Flash initially, and I like to have the tops of my boards be bare. I'm kind of a fan of that. I do surface mount design, and so I put all the surface mount parts on the bottom of the board, because then you can put a description on the top, CoCo Flash, or designed by Jim, or whatever it is, right? You can be a little vain and put all your stuff on the top. It just makes for a cleaner board. So I had the whole CoCo Flash board design, and then I went to put it in a cartridge case, which dumb me, right? I was used to Commodore cases where the PC board sits in the middle of the case, so the top half and the bottom half of the case sandwich in between the cartridge PCB. Sure. Well, in the CoCo, that's not true. The CoCo cartridge PCB sits at the very bottom of the cartridge case, and so there's very little room underneath the cartridge case, especially you've got one of them that's got a little spring-loaded window or whatever. There's no room underneath, and so I had the whole design. I'd sent it out for prototypes, and I got it in, and I thought, oh, it works, and then I put it in a cartridge case, and it wouldn't fit at all. And then I had to basically start over and flip it wasn't horrible, but it was like you think you're done, and then all of a sudden you're not.
Yeah.
And another piece that was a deal is, I wanted a way to see. This is something I'd never heard of, right? This is just something that only comes when you learn about another platform. But here I am. I'm, in Commodore world, and Commodore cartridges, you sometimes put a reset button on, because everybody likes to have a reset button on a cartridge. And so I just, as a general rule, I put them in every cartridge I make. I put a reset button, just because it's like first thing people ask for. So I had a reset button on the unit, and then Barry says, yeah, he said, how are you going to reset? He said, every time I hit the reset button, it goes back to the main menu. And I'm like, well, yeah, of course. That's what I wanted it to do. And he goes, yeah, well, that's great. Except, on the CoCo 1 and 2, a lot of times when you'd run a game, it would show up in the wrong color scheme. So it would be blue and not red or whatever it was, right? And so the way to get around that is that you, and see, I've never played a game that did this, so I'm just completely a neophyte on this. But he's like, well, the way you get around that is when you just keep hitting the reset button until you get to a color scheme that, until the screen that comes up says, if this screen is blue, hit the reset button or whatever. And you just keep hitting the reset button until the screen isn't blue, and then you can go on with the rest of the game. And after I got done cursing the fact that had to happen, right? Then I said, well, what am I going to do? And he goes, well, you need to have basically two resets. You need to have a reset that just resets but stays in the same game. And then you have another reset that resets and goes back to the main menu of the cartridge. And by that time, the design's pretty well done, and there's not a lot of room left to put more functionality in. And so here I am trying to figure out how else can I build this capability into the cartridge with the limited amount of functionality that I have left to do what I need to do. So there's those things, and that's my fault, right? I should have learned more about the various, kind of compatibility issues or whatnot that I had to deal with on the CoCo. But you go into these projects and you don't know what you don't know, so you get all the way down the road, and then at the end you realize that you completely forgot about red and blue, and the fact that on CoCos that's a real thing, and you need to deal with it. So those are things you have to. And then the end result is that that just drags out the time. People are like, hey, when's CoCo Flash going to be available? Well, if I could have just sat down and developed the hardware, and it would have worked the first time, and I didn't need to move the cartridge upside down, and I didn't need to add Orchestra 90 capability, and I didn't need to deal with this red-blue stuff, I could have had it done like a year before when I had it done. So I think that's some things people are really excited, and I love the fact that they're excited. I really do. I so want to be able to walk up to them and say, you know what, can I put you in stasis for maybe 6 months, because I know you're really excited, and I want you to be really excited when I get ready to do this finished design. But there is no way I'm going to be able to finish it in the next 2 months or whatever, because I got other things. I got a real job, and I got, my kids are older now, but I still got things I got to do, and a house that'll fall apart if I don't spend a little time working on it. So I don't have 24 hours a day to work on color cartridges or color computer cartridges or whatever. One of the other things I would say right now that's a challenge for me is, and we talked about, Ed Snyder's CoCo PSG functionality earlier, and I worked on I have a similar product called CoCo Sound that I'm trying to put together. And I know, John, you and I talked at CoCo Fest about capabilities around putting the, and I always forget the number, 76489, I think is what the chip is. But I love the idea of making a better sound cartridge for the CoCo, and I love the idea that you have, which is, I'd like to have the ability to put some games on the cartridge. So the cartridge is a self-contained thing. It has sound. It has the ability to put a game on it. It's a one-stop shop. I like that idea. I think it's really cool. But right now there's kind of three different variations on that theme, and there's probably not a market for various completely incompatible sound solutions. And so what I'm trying to ferret out right now, and the reason I haven't really done any work on that design for a while, I've got it literally, I'm looking at it on my bench here with my soldering iron and whatnot. I'm looking at it here and thinking, I don't know how much more work I should put into it right now, because I need to figure out, what does the market really want? What are they, where are they going to coalesce? Because really, it needs to be something that's going to drive folks like John and other game developers to really grab hold of that cartridge and make it their own. And so trying to figure out exactly, and I know John's kind of put his foot in the ground and said, or put a stake in the ground and said, I'm going to align my efforts around this Texas Instruments chip. And that's fine. Then you've got, Nick Marinas, who's saying, you know what, that's a really limiting chip, and I'd really like the speech sound capability that's in the speech sound cartridge, because I want to have predefined samples that I can play as part of my game. And I'm not saying those things are bad or good. I'm just trying to figure out which ones of those are going to kind of win out in the court of public opinion, so that whatever product comes out is going to be of the most utility to the most number of people, right? It's going to have the most value. So those are things where having a additional clarity is always it's a good thing, because when the mood strikes me to whip up a hardware design, boy, I can go a mile a minute, but I've got probably half dozen designs sitting on my bench right now, which were ideas, and I went ahead and got the prototype boards, and I realized, yeah, nobody's going to buy this. So it's just kind of sitting there, and I'll probably throw it in a box, and I'll probably bring it to Tandy Assembly, and people go, what's that? And I'm like, I don't know. You can have the PCB, see if you can do anything with it, and have fun, So.
Very cool. Well, awesome.
I mean, I appreciate the questions. I feel like, Neil, you had more questions, but you didn't want to ask them.
For the interview?
Yeah.
No, that was good.
Okay.
Yeah, that was good. The only other thing I was going to mention in there is I actually like the idea of the ribbon cable design that you had for the MPI. I know it's a pain for you, but what's cool about that design is that it's more accommodating for desks, for real estate. Because, I mean, the problem with the MPI is that it does stick straight out. Mm-hmm. And your design is, I mean, that's great.
I know, and I love design. I don't really want to go back to do a straight out design like Dead's, CoCo Mini MPI. It's a you don't know what you don't know. You get into it, and then you get far way down the design, and you realize that, ooh, man, now I have to take transmission line theory and figure out what's going on here, because all my signals look like crap. So,
well, gentlemen, anyone else got something to ask?
No.
Jim, this has been an amazing interview. I think it's been very, very cooperative, shall we say? It's been really good having you talk to us. And so I appreciate you sitting in with us and giving us a good interview. And well, that's it. Thanks.
No problem. You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Great interview.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Very good.
It's great to have you on the show.
Okay.
You can always find back-to-school value and selection at your local Radio Shack store. Save now on our wide range of popular calculators. Our children's learning calculator is just $10.95. Or how about the solar-powered EC401 calculator? It never needs batteries, and it's on sale now for just $22.95. For older students, the EC499 full scientific calculator features 50 functions for just $34.95. Off to college this fall? Our famous realistic Minimus 7 speakers offer big sound in a small space. They're less than 8 inches high, but deliver up to 40 watts of big, rich sound. On sale for just $39.95 each. And for education and entertainment for the entire family, it's the TRS-80 Color Computer. Learn to write your own programs or choose from a large library of plug-in program packs. The Color Computer comes with 4,000 characters of internal memory, 8 colors, and a built-in RS-232 interface for easy communication ability. The Color Computer is specially priced at just $359. That's $40 off the catalog price. For these back-to-school specials and others, be sure to visit your local Radio Shack store. Radio Shack, a Tandy company.
Myro? It'll catch on.
From the nation's capital, the CoCo Group. An unrehearsed program presenting inside opinions and forecasts on major issues of the day.
Tandy is proud to support the CoCo Group. From multi-packs to game cartridges, Tandy, because there is no better value.
And now your moderator.
Issue 1, Assembling at Tandy Assembly. In just a few months, enthusiasts of the Tandy and Radio Shack computers will be gathering in Ohio for the premiere of Tandy Assembly. Organizers have chosen the city of Chillicothe to host the event. Known as the center of the ancient Hopewell tradition, which flourished from 200 BC until 500 AD, Chillicothe is situated along the Scioto River in the southern part of the state. Question: is Chillicothe the right venue for the new event? John.
Is Chillicothe the right venue for the new event? Is this a serious question? If you don't like it, you're welcome to organize your own event. As it is, this is the place we picked. It's centrally located on the East Coast. It's convenient to the Midwest. It's a nice little town in the middle America. I don't know why you'd have anything against it. It's a nice place. Just come on out. Honestly, you're not coming for the sightseeing, you're coming for the Tandy. So come and see the Tandy.
Neil.
Is Chillicothe the right venue location for this event? Definitely. With a name like Chillicothe, I can't see how we can go wrong. It's just such a cool name.
Mike.
Of course, Chillicothe was the best choice. Do you think we'd have it in Supai, Arizona or Flint, Michigan? I don't think so. We have all of the facilities and accessibility that we need in a very good location, and we're quite happy with Chillicothe.
The answer is yes. Chillicothe will provide an excellent location for hosting Tandy Assembly. Predictions. John?
Predictions. Tandy Assembly will exceed expectations both in terms of attendance and in terms of enjoyment. It's going to be a great event.
Neil.
Well, with our guest speaker lineup, such as Don French and Scott Adams, if that is any indication, I have a feeling it's going to be a pretty good event. Should be a really nice turnout, and we hope to see all of you there.
Mike.
We're going 3 for 3 on this one. I fully agree with John and Neil. It's going to be a great event, and everyone should come to Tandy Assembly in Chillicothe, Ohio.
Tandy Assembly will be a successful event. Next week, the Gimme Chips finest year, 86 or 87. Bye-bye.
Myro? It'll catch on.
Learn how to use your computer for more than just games with Hot CoCo Magazine. Hot CoCo is packed with business application programs, home management help, programming tips and tutorials, product reviews, and more. Subscribe for just $24.97 for 12 issues. That's 30% off the newsstand price. Let Hot CoCo show you how much time you can save with your color computer. And save even more time with Instant CoCo, the cassette version of Hot CoCo Magazine, containing all of the programs that appear in the issue. See the latest issue of Hot CoCo Magazine for details. Hot CoCo, available at fine retailers everywhere.
All right, welcome back to another CoCo Crew Tech segment. I'm, of course, with John Linville, and today I'll be talking a bit about the topic of self-modifying code. This steers a bit close to last month's topic about machine code versus assembly code. We'll try to not get too deep in the weeds there, at least in this segment. But, the discussion there did bring up some interesting topics. So, anyway, what is self-modifying code? Well, of course, self-modifying code is a program that modifies itself. Ha ha ha. Well, but what exactly does that mean? And it turns out there's actually, in modern computer science, there's possibly more than one meaning to that. But traditional, certainly in the retro world, when you talk about self-modifying code, you're generally talking about a program that modifies existing bits of itself in response to runtime stimulus of some sort. So basically, effectively, you're treating parts of your instruction stream as data to be modified. So again, that's where you're taking your instructions, your actual, shall we say, machine code in memory, and treating that as data. And so you're literally changing, 34 to 37 and whatever instruction change that amounts to. That's what you're doing. In particular, this is not, this discussion at least is not going to be talking about JIT or just-in-time compiling or anything like that. We're talking about where you write your own instruction stream kind of from scratch. I know Simon Jonason's done some work recently where he does plotting of lines, and then he writes his own erase routine for each line kind of in place. I don't really consider that self-modifying code. It's, like I said, it's more like a just-in-time compiler. It's similar, but a little bit different. Anyway, so that's what we're going to be talking about. Programs that, like I say, they modify themselves. Okay, so how is this technique used? Well, there's bound to be a lot of different ways to do it that would amount to self-modifying code, and I'm not going to try to cover every possible example, but I will try to provide some general outlines for people who are at least vaguely familiar with programming in general or assembly language programming specifically. And if you don't already know what self-modifying code is, or if you haven't really seen it, maybe I can provide some examples in mind that will at least help illustrate the concept. So one of the simplest things I can think of that you could do that would amount to self-modifying code is if you were to, before you go to execute a subroutine, if you were to actually go in and modify the instruction stream for that subroutine with parameters. And say you're going to call an add subroutine, and instead of pushing a 5 and a 3 on the stack and calling the subroutine, if you literally went into that subroutine and changed the first instruction from, load A, 0 to load A5, and the second instruction from load B0 to load B3, and then the third instruction was an add, followed by a return or whatever, then, you could get your result back, your addition of 3 and 5, which would be 8. You get it a little bit faster than if you had to push them onto the stack and pull it off. Now, obviously, that's a contrived example, and probably not worthwhile because of, the downsides of self-modifying code, which we'll get into a little bit later. But that would be a self-modifying code example that would be reasonable to do if you had reason to do that addition and in a way that saves every cycle possible. Then, of course, by the time you've written out, I'm not sure how much you'd actually save in that example. In fact, you might actually lose out by trying to write to extended addressing rather than just pushing on the stack. But if you had something similar to that, or a more complicated algorithm or something like that, you might actually be able to save some instruction cycles that way. Anyway, I'm not advocating that use of self-modifying code. Or in fact, I'm probably not going to advocate any use of self-modifying code. But if you did that, that'd be an example of what we're talking about. So moving on, what's another example? So you might do configuration of you might configure your program with certain kind of execution options, and so when your program runs, instead of having to go and check your options database or whatever that amounts to, might be checking bit flags somewhere or something like that. Your initialization routine might actually just go through and find your code where you branch off to certain pieces of the code for handling those options, and just replace those with NOPs or branch nevers or whatever. And so you just literally comment out to the sections of code would do so at runtime, where you just jump right over them. And so this is when I understand branch always, a branch and branch never are like one one value apart. One's like if one's 40, the next one's 41 or whatever on the 6809. And so that might be, people sometimes wonder, what's the point of a branch never? Well, besides being a longer NOP or whatever, you could argue that it's actually there for self-modifying code to be able to turn turn off chunks of code that were branches and become just dead code with a branch never. Anyway, again, it kind of depends on your program, but if you ran your initialization, if you had everything mapped out to where you could just turn off chunks of your algorithm by changing your branches to branch nevers or whatever, or whatever equivalent thing you might want to do, that would be self-modifying code, and that'd be a pretty reasonable way to use it. In fact, little secret here, most people probably don't know this, but in many there's several options in the Linux kernel related to trace points and that sort of thing, or sometimes there's pieces of code that actually have optimizations for specific processors, specific Intel processors, that sort of thing, that as your kernel boots up, it'll go through and figure out exactly what machine it's actually running on, and it can go through and turn on different options for optimizing certain operations based on exactly which processor you have. I'll bet you didn't know that. So that is effectively, and that really is self-modifying code, and it's running in a very modern system. In fact, not even really assembly language. I mean, those little tiny bits really are, but the overall kernel is not an assembly language. It's in C. But anyway, there's a form of self-modifying code that is reasonably legitimate, depending on what exactly you're doing. So particularly, like if you have a piece of code that kind of loads once and doesn't get rerun a lot, but needs to run for a long time with a specific set of options in place, that's a pretty good way to handle it. All right, so I got a third kind of example of how you might use self-modifying code. It's sort of similar to the last one, where you can configuring around execution options, but in this case, rather than doing it sort of once at startup, there's something you might do more often, but say like every time you enter a big loop or something like that. So you could do sort of a pre-programmed flow control. And what I mean is there's a couple of variations here. For example, if you have a loop that's unrolled somewhere and it has a maximum number of times that you might run something, you might go through 8 times maximum, but sometimes you want to go through 2 times or 4 times or something. If you handle it right, you could go through that loop and execute or find where the end of the third iteration of the loop is and change that instruction to shortcut the loop so that, after you've done it 3 times, it's not really a loop, it's an unrolled loop, but once you've done the third iteration, you break out, and so you don't go all the way to doing 8 iterations. So you can do that. You might do, so for example, if you have a flag of some sort, rather than check the flag during execution, what you might do several times during execution of a loop or whatever, before you enter that loop or before you enter that function that contains the loop, you might just go ahead and check the flag once yourself and say, oh, okay, well, I know that flag is set, so I'm just always going to execute what I'm supposed to do when that flag is set, and so you go off and modify the code appropriately. So that way, every time you go through the loop, you can avoid that code to check this flag status. Saves you some instructions. If the loop runs often enough, or is enough iterations, it can save you quite a bit. So, all right, well, those are kind of our big examples. There's probably a few other kinds of things that might fit. There might be entire other categories out there, but I think most other categories, even those 3, start to overlap some. So Probably any other category you might think of. I'd bet there's some overlap with those three, but maybe not. There might be some totally unique other examples. I think that's good enough for now. So we already hit into why would you use this? Why would you want to do something like this? Why would you want to rewrite the machine code in memory at execution time? And the only really good reason I can think of is to maximize performance. And so, like I say, you can do these different things as long as you can manage the complexity you're introducing by doing the self-modifying code. You can save a lot of cycles. Like I say, when you run through loops, like when you go to optimize code in general, and when you're doing like an algorithmic optimization, you try to figure out how to minimize the number of times you loop through something, how to minimize the number of times you have to check something in a loop. And so, this is like a step further, is just rewriting the code so you don't have to check things if you already know them. So, I mean, you can save a lot of cycles if you judiciously exercise the ability to rewrite your code. Now, one other reason, and I'd say not as good in a general sense, especially nowadays, since this is all retro stuff and mostly we're interested in it just for fun or for learning. But if you wanted to obfuscate what your code is actually doing, and so the prime example of this might be if you're trying to put in an anti-piracy scheme in your code, so you don't want people to copy your code. Putting in some self-modifying bits here and there certainly can make it difficult to understand what your code is doing. It certainly makes it very difficult or impossible sometimes to analyze what your code does just on paper, and it makes it even still difficult to analyze it if you're looking at it in a runtime thing, like in a debugger. So whether or not that's a good use, I guess, depends on your perspective. But if you want to obfuscate how your code works, throwing in some self-modification is a pretty effective way to do that. Okay, so all right, well, so we know sort of what it is, what we do with it, why we do it, but so why wouldn't you do it? Well, the main thing is it really is just sort of an unnatural thing to do. And so what I mean by that is, like, for example, if you're going to use, say, the changing the parameters to an algorithm at runtime, well, if you don't know the value of one of your parameters, then when you write the algorithm, you might need to check to see if the first parameter is greater than 5. Right? That's reasonable. Or, less than 10 or something like that. But if you were just passing in the parameter in your actual original assembly code, well, you'd know if it was greater than 5 or less than 10 or whatever, so you really wouldn't have to bother to write a check for that. But since the code that you're going to run doesn't really match the code that you're looking at in your source code, you have to do something weird. Like this one gets me when I look at some of Simon's code, because he does a lot of self-modifying stuff. He'll have a piece of code and it'll say, like, load A, 0, and then, branch if greater than or equal. So, well, you just loaded it. How could it be greater than or equal? or whatever, you know in advance, but you don't, right? You have to write around it. So that's confusing. It's kind of a weird thing to do. So because of that, it makes your code difficult to read and difficult to write. You have to write in for cases that the source code doesn't really illustrate. When you're reading it, when you read the plain source code, it doesn't really match necessarily what you're going to read if you disassemble what's in memory. It adds a lot of complexity to the task of developing software, especially on the debugging side. So like I say, your code is actually changing as you're running, potentially, depending on what kind of method you're using. It certainly doesn't match what's written in your assembly source. So it's very difficult to debug code that does self-modification. Now, it kind of depends on how much modification you're doing. It probably isn't too difficult once you figure out that you're doing it to debug one that just overwrites parameters to an algorithm. And once one that goes through and turns off a bunch of options at initialization time, that's probably not too hard to get your head around either. One that rewrites loops in the middle of execution, that one's probably pretty tricky to track down. And like I said, there's probably other ways you can do self-modifying code, and I imagine they're all even harder to deal with. So anyway, so there you have it. Self-modifying code at a high level. Like I said, I can't really recommend it. It can be like I said, it can be the way you maximize performance, and by that I mean, you can do things with self-modifying code that are literally impossible just because of lack of cycle budget without doing that sort of thing. So yeah, in conclusion, we're talking about a technique that you can squeeze maximum performance out of your code. But it is going to be difficult, to learn to do self-modifying code. You probably will have to go down into learning, that back to the machine code versus assembly code debate here. You will have to learn those machine code encodings. So if you think of that as a separate language, then you're going to have to learn machine language to be able to do this sort of thing. Like I said, my argument is that they're really the same language, but it is a different encoding of the language, so you're going to have to learn a different alphabet. So anyway, it's going to be difficult to learn how to do this sort of thing. It's difficult to apply. Not just every algorithm is going to lend itself to being fixed up in a self-modifying sort of way. Sometimes you may spend more time doing the modifications than you actually save in running the code that's been modified. So you're going to have to learn how to judge that, how to figure that out, hopefully quickly in your head before you waste a lot of time doing it. But even then, you're going to have to work through all the complications of writing the code in a strange way and then debugging it if it doesn't work. Like I said, it's going to be harder to read your code, harder to figure out. Talk about walking away from a piece of code and come back 3 weeks later and you can't understand what it is because you didn't put enough comments in. Well, self-modifying code stuff, you can put in comments and you still won't be able to understand it because, the code's going to change right underneath your feet. So it's going to be hard to do, hard to read, hard to debug. It's going to be difficult to learn. With, fewer rewards. But like I say, in some instances, you will be able to save those extra 10 cycles or whatever it is you need and take something that was literally impossible just because of lack of CPU cycles, and you go off and write the code this other way. You may save just enough cycles to make it possible. So writing your code with self-modifying code, it's what I would describe as a heroic technique to use on what are otherwise impossible tasks. If you just can't do it with, shall we say, normal code, code that's readable by normal software developers, then it's something that can be done. I think I saw Kieran Anscombe, Sixty, said something. He asserted that there was some forms of audio processing that are impossible without self-modifying code, and I believe that's probably true, just because it's a kind of application that demands every CPU cycle it can get. So there probably are some things that you just really can't do without self-modifying code, or a faster processor. And since people are pretty much done making 6809s with the exceptions of the FPGAs, If you're going to live within the boundaries of real silicon, then there's only so many ways to get these crazy tasks done, and self-modifying code might be one of them. Anyway, so would I recommend it? No, in general, I would not recommend resorting to self-modifying code. It's an impractical means for developing code. If you can do, most applications really don't require it. If you're really hoping to do something amazing, some kind of Sockmaster-esque demo or Simon Jonason-esque demo of crazy things that nobody thought was possible, well, you can pull off a lot of stuff, even those sort of things to some degree, and still not have to have self-modifying code. So until you really need it, I wouldn't really even consider it myself. But, some people like the idea. That's the kind of thing that some people are just back in the hobby strictly so they can write their amazing 8-bit arcade game with self-modifying code, and oh wow, isn't that cool? Those are probably the same guys that have their feathers ruffled when I tell them that there's no good reason to learn machine language. So here I am once again making friends and influencing people, and this is the CoCo Crew Podcast. I am John Linville. Thank you for joining me for this tech segment, and as always, retro forever.
I finally got to talk to Kevin. They handed me the phone, and I said, "Hello, darling. It's been a long time since you worked on level 2 OS 9. But I'm begging you now, please hear my plea. Kevin, darling, set the upgrade free." Well, I spoke to Kent Meyer today. Mark Griffith, he gave his okay. Bill Dickhouse said that the contract was dead. It expired back in 93. So I'm leaving it all up to you. And you know what I hope you will do. So I'm begging you now, please hear my plea. Kevin, darling, set the upgrade free. Last night, as I sat by the screen, I must have been having a dream. For what did I see on the old CRT but the words OS 9 level 3? So I'm leaving it all up to you. And you know what I hope you will do. So I'm begging you now, please hear my plea. Kevin, darling, set the upgrade free. So I'm begging you now, please hear my plea. Kevin, darling, set the upgrade free.
Myro. It'll catch on.
Welcome back to Neil's Corner on episode 26 of the CoCo Crew Podcast. I'm dedicating this segment to Bob Swoger and the others at Glenside. I'm going to talk a little bit about a utility called Logicall that was originally written by Robert Swoger for Gatorsoft and released in 1995 for the Timex Sinclair 2068 computer. Afterwards, somewhere in the time of 2010, I believe it was around 2010, Bob Swoger released it for the Tandy Color computer with the help of John Mark Mobley and Chris Hawks. I was fortunate to see a live demo of it running at the 22nd annual last Chicago CoCo Fest in 2013. So what is Logicall anyways? Well, it's basically a mini operating system disk management tool. It changes the way you normally use your CoCo by replacing the original command line interface with a fully navigational menu system. The menu is capable of mapping any drives that are available and launching any programs that reside in them. Logicall can also display picture files and text files without the use of an external program to view them. For optimal memory usage, Logicall will completely close before the called upon program loads. Once you exit the program you are using, Logicall will then return. Another cool feature of Logicall is that it can perform system commands by the touch of a single keystroke. For example, you can format floppies, copy, rename, move, and delete files, all by the use of a single key. It makes the user experience a lot more pleasing and eliminates the need for knowing or learning DOS commands. Not only does Logicall support 4 standard floppy drives, it also supports up to 256 virtual drives. It's compatible with RS-DOS, RGB-DOS, HDB-DOS, and DriveWire. It is probably compatible with other DOSes as well. I find Logicall extremely useful when using my CoCo with a hard drive attached, because it makes it a breeze to hop from one drive to another and browse or copy files. The program has a built-in 2-page help file by pressing F1. This saves you time for looking things up in the original manual. Another cool thing is, since Logicall was written completely in BASIC, it is possible for anyone fluent in this language to customize Logicall to their own needs. I purchased Logicall at CoCo Fest that came on a fancy USB memory stick. However, since CoCo Fest 2013, Bob Swoger has announced Logicall shall be free. Unfortunately, I do not see Logicall available to download anywhere on the internet. The link Bob had provided on Dropbox no longer works. It currently is not on the CoCo Archives website either. I will look into this and see if we can get it available on there for download. However, I do notice you can email Bob Swoger directly from the Glenside website at www.glensideccc.com for information and possible download arrangements for Logicall. Well, there you have it, a new disk management utility to try. I hope you enjoyed this segment, something a little different from Game Talk. Until next month, happy CoCoing.
Well, good afternoon. And my name's Tony Pedraza, and I am the host of the annual last Chicago CoCo Fest. We call it the last in quotes because we really don't know if we're going to have another one. And we haven't known every year for the past 17 years.
Myro, it'll catch on.
Well, is it that time already? Have we seriously reached the end of episode 26? A big thanks goes out to our host John Linville for his lovely songs he sings to us, and for scouting out news items and making sure we have enough each month, and also for providing us with another tech segment. Another big thanks goes out to Mike Rowan, or should I say Myro, for producing all those amazing commercials and clips each month. I must say those commercials and clips have really made it much more enjoyable for me editing and stitching the podcast together each month. We also can't forget to thank Jim Brain for being a part of the show this month and giving us some of your time to record that excellent interview. Last but not least, we'd like to thank all of you for listening and supporting us each month. Well, until next month, happy CoCoing and CoCo forever.